Good evening, everybody. This is Mike Myers. I'm the director of the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. I know some of you in the audience. Probably I was the fire chief here in the city of Portland for a few years, and fire chief for a small city in Nevada called Las Vegas for a few years prior to that. And Commissioner Hardesty asked me to come back and be the emergency management director about 6 months ago. I'm relatively new back in this position and inherited this URM issue as well as Joanne Hardesty did too. I can remember one of my first meetings with her. This was the first topic that came up. And she talked to me then about making a pretty significant switch from mandatory policy to a voluntary policy. You'll talk about that, I'm sure, in the next few meetings and what that means. And I know what her interest is, and my interests are, is that we come together as a community of building owners, URM owners, and people that are trying to write policy and figure out what we can do together. I think we all want the same thing. I want to stay in Portland. I want to be responsible about earthquake preparedness. But I want private businesses to be viable here in Portland as well. So I want to thank you for spending your personal time with us tonight. I know this is a lot of your own time and other things you could be doing, but I know this is also hopefully important to you. It certainly is. Commissioner Hardesty couldn't personally be here tonight, so you know Jonna. Jonna marched down there and asked the commissioner to put something together, so she provided us a video that I think would be welcoming you as well. So once again, thank you. I hope this is fruitful and we can work together. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Mike. And I'm Samuel Parati. I'm facilitating this evening. And next up is Commissioner Joanne Hardesty's welcoming video.
Hi, I'm Commissioner Joanne Hardesty. First, thank you so much for volunteering your time to help us with this important work. You may know when I took office on January 2nd, I inherited something I'd never heard of before, URMs, right? But now I know more about URMs than you would believe. We need your best thinking. You know, when we started this process, we made some mistakes, but we're starting fresh. We're starting with a new eye, a new vision, and we need you. We need you to think outside the box. I need you to come to City Council and present your findings. And I would love if it was a minority report, because guess what? We don't all think the same, which is why you're on this committee. You may not know this, but I am responsible for Portland Fire and Rescue, our Bureau of Emergency Management, the 911 call center, and the Police and Fire Retirement Center. So I have the bulk of first responders in my portfolio, and it's really important for me that we keep this community safe. We will all have to depend on each other when the big it happens, and your work is going to be vital to that. I look forward to following your work and following the community conversations around what you're coming up with. Thanks again, and I look forward to meeting each and every one of you soon.
So, good evening. Welcome to the beginning of the first URM meeting. We're going to do a total do-over, and thank you for attending. So, my name is Samuel Parati. I'll be facilitating this evening. Juanita Raines was unable to be with us tonight. By way of a brief introduction, I'm a lawyer by training, but not by inclination. I was in private practice. I represented labor unions and their members. Then I was Nike's trial attorney and did their litigation. And then as my hair grayed, I thought I'd look good in a black robe with a white shirt and a red tie. And I sat on the bench for 5 years here in Multnomah County Circuit Court as what we call a pro tem judge. And that's where I had my epiphany du jour that there had to be a better way to resolve conflict than the adversarial system. So in 1992, I became a full-time mediator and facilitator. Technically, my job here and throughout this process is to quote-unquote facilitate this discussion. As part of the request for a proposal process and the interview process, I reframed that, and the city agreed that my role here has to be a little bit more robust. And by which I mean my goal is to mediate the issue. So what's the stereotypical facilitator? It's someone that says it's X o'clock on the agenda, and now we're going to talk about wallpapering with flair or whatever the topic du jour is. As a mediator, I do that. We have agendas. We try our best to keep to the time frame. But I'm here to help everyone have difficult conversations. I'm here to help create an environment where we can explore these issues as much as debate them. And I've been able to interview about half of you, and I look forward to meeting the other half as we go forward. So, what are the meeting goals for today? Well, they're pretty straightforward, but I think it's important to have them. And it's by the end of the meeting, we will have more information about each other, the people sitting around the table. Who are you? What are your passions? What are your thoughts? What do you want to try to accomplish over the course of the next several months? I hope we learned a little bit about how we've got here, what the past, not to relive it, but to set the tone for the future. What have we learned? How did we get here? What are we going to do about it? Understand the City Council's intended scope or the mission or the charge for this work group. Explore the proposed process mechanics. How are we going to do that? How are we going to move from where we are today to a report where folks present to City Council directly without going through city staff? What your thoughts are and have been. We're going to give some training on collaboration and how these processes can work well. You all are public officials under the state statute, and you'll have a training from the city attorney on what those obligations are and what those requirements are. We'll hear from the public. There'll be an opportunity for public comment period, and we'll determine next steps. So for the record, this matter is being recorded, as you can see from the microphones in front of you. And for those people that are going to give public testimony, please know that is the case. So agenda review. Agendas, in my experience with these public policy processes, I like to call them working agendas. They tend to ebb and flow as the needs and desires of the work group require. So this is obviously the welcome meeting goals and agenda review. We're going to have an opportunity for member statements and introductions in a minute. There'll be the required group bonding exercise. We'll be doing trust fall. No, we're not going to do trust fall. I know some of you are terribly disappointed, but we're holding the insurance policy that I have said no trust falls. We'll have a little training, exploration of collaboration. We'll look at where we've been in the past for the timeline and what the city has learned from that. We'll dive into the resolution and bylaws. There will be a working dinner, which I don't know if that means the food is tough and we have to work at it, but there will be food available. And we'll come back. There'll be a public official training and official disclosures comments. I am calling an audible and flipping the public comment period with a draft work plan, because on further reflection, it seemed to make sense that the public should be able to see and hear the work plan and then comment, as opposed to do the comment and then have this hanging chad issue that you didn't have an opportunity to see. So that's the audible that I'm calling. And we will probably, some of these times, will flex as the process goes on. So by way of introductions and statements, I'll first announce we do have a few members that were not able to attend, some calling in the last 15 minutes or so. So Shirley Chalupa is unable to attend. Pastor Mark Jackson is unable to attend. Mary Rain O'Mara, unable to attend. Nicholas Peterson is working this evening with toddlers in post-school daycare, so he's unable to attend. Annette, unable to attend. Mark Stevenson, unable to attend, and Tom Sorchin, unable to attend. So with that said, you will see that each of you have name tents in front of you. They have different colors. So what the facilitation team did is looked at each of your astrological signs and talked to your spouse, partners, and significant others and decided it made sense to attach a color to you. And okay, alternatively, what this means is this group has two subcommittees, a for-profit subcommittee and a nonprofit subcommittee. So your color helps the other members of the group identify you as to which subcommittee you are part of. And that was simply the key code for doing that. This evening, again, we consulted. This is Devin Howington, my senior associate. She is a PhD in social psychology. And so as we were thinking about how to seat you around the table, she did a lot of research, and we talked with several people, and we went with alphabetical. From Peter Angel all around the hoop to Bart. So that's how you're seated today. In future meetings, we'll mix this up a little bit. And so you are seated next to other people, because the goal is about relationship and communication and going forward. There's going to be opportunity for, in addition to public comment, but to member comment. And the way to get my attention and get in the queue is to simply take your name tent and put it up like this. Put it up like this, preferably with the name kind of pointed towards me, so I can get a cue, and I will do my best to call on you in the order that I see you. And if I make a mistake, my apologies in advance, and you can help me and certainly say, I'm next, whatever works in that regard. So what we're going to ask you to do here is members, give us your name. Tell us what subcommittee you are on. So you're on the for-profit or nonprofit subcommittee pursuant to the city resolution. And then there are interest groups, that loose affiliations. Some people have multiple roles in this process. So we're asking you, are you a community design person, finance person, historical preservation, investment developer, nonprofit, multifamily, place of worship, tenant advocate, URM building owner. So we'd ask you to announce all of the interest groups that you generally affiliate with. If you want to qualify those with any words like small business, you are a building owner, medium-sized, large, that's totally up to you and your prerogative. And then ask you, why is this work important to you? So why is the work we're about to launch forward on, why is it important to you? We're hoping that each of you will do this in approximately 1 minute and 46 seconds. No, you got 2 minutes to go forward and present that information. And if you can stay as close to the script as you can, that would be great. But if you want to do it a different way, go for it. So it's your name, the subcommittee, the interest group, and why this work is important to you. This, in fact, you will see later is part of your public official disclosures surrounding conflicts of interest and where people's at. Frankly, all of you have, in the layperson sense, a, quote, conflict of interest. Otherwise, you wouldn't be on this committee. You just don't get random people off the street and say, you want to come in, we'll give you a free meal if you want to come and talk about URM building. So we'll get more into that when the city attorney arrives. So let's hear from each of you. I would suggest I'll simply take volunteers, perhaps the most intelligent and best looking person on the committee first, and then we'll go in descending order, or we can do the reverse and go in ascending order, whatever, or just randomly. So just raise your tent when you want to get in the queue, and we'll take it away. This is the audience participation portion of the work group. I've seen this happen. Anthony, welcome.
Thank you.
And maybe look into your speak into your microphones. And is there are they on? Folks, tell us if they're on.
Is this on? This is on.
Great.
Thank you. My name is Anthony Benchavenga. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am on the for-profit subcommittee as a tenant advocate. I originally got involved in this work as an organizer with Portland Tenants United. Portland Tenants United was part of the coalition which opposed the initial URM placarding ordinance specifically because we were very concerned about impacts that it could have on displacement because of the specific way that it was designed. It's extremely important to me that we carry out as many URM retrofits as is feasible because I obviously, like I think everyone else around this table, am very concerned about what could happen during an earthquake and the tenants who could be harmed. At the same time, and this is a concern that some people around this table may not share, I am just as worried about the disaster of gentrification, which is currently affecting our city long before any earthquake. I'm particularly worried about the potential that URM retrofits and or remodels, renovations, whatever term we want to use, will be used as a pretext to carry out mass landlord cause evictions of tenants in buildings that currently have lower rents. Something which is being going to be especially encouraged now that there is a loophole in state protections against no cause evictions and against rent gouging, which enables landlords to give landlord cause evictions in the case of a building remodel or renovation. So for me, it's extremely important that we ensure there are strong protections in here, first of all, to protect tenants against displacement, and second, to make sure that tenants have a say in how the retrofits are carried out and how this affects their lives day to day in the building, so that they cannot be used as a way to drive tenants out through constructive eviction.
Thank you very much. Okay, John, I think saw you next.
Name is John Russell. I'd fit the for-profit category, and in terms of interests, I'd fit several of them. In terms of community involvement, I've served on the Landmark Commission, which has a lot of URMs, the Planning Commission, which dealt with that, and I chaired the Development Commission, which had a lot of involvement in that. I own 5 buildings that are probably classified as URMs, this issue is really important to me because it's a lot more sophisticated and complicated than people give it credit for. For example, I developed a 30-story building, Pac West Center. The code, I mean, obviously it was built in '84 to the then current code, but the code has changed. And so you could have a plaque on that building that says unreinforced steel building. I own a building at the corner of First and Oak that was built from scratch to look exactly like it would have in 1890, but in the drive past review of URMs by the city, it was listed as an unreinforced masonry, when in fact it meets current code. And third building is the building 2 doors down from that, the second oldest building in the city, built in 1859. When I restored it and lived in it in the early 70s, it was restored to the then current code. Shear walls were put in, but the code has changed, and so it, as I think is true with a lot of buildings, they were done to code at the time, but the code has changed. So that's why, to me, this is a sophisticated, complicated problem. But fundamentally, this is a public safety issue, not just people living and working in a building, but people walking by.
Preacher microphone.
You've got an hour and a half. Try to limit it to an hour and a half.
Pastor Roy Tate, Christ Memorial Church. I'm from nonprofit representing the places of worship. I'm here because I had major concerns regarding the things that could happen to the churches in our community for the longevity and the work that they have done, and was pretty much concern when the issue first started that we was not brought to the table. But I'm glad that this process has begun now, that we're able to get things squared away. I think it's important that we come together and come to some solution and we are definitely concerned about the safety of everybody. That's what we preach every Sunday. And so that's not an issue. The issue is how can we effectively work together and get things done in a proper manner. Thanks.
And now I'm on. My name is David Chown with Chown Hardware in Northwest Portland. We're a family-owned business, actually been in business for a long, long time. Won't get into that part of it. We own several buildings that we also occupy, so I'm in, I guess, the investor-developer class, although we don't really, well, we are investing in buildings, but we also occupy them ourselves. I've been involved in this issue as also a board member for the Portland Business Alliance, which is how I got into the committee. I was the government relations chair and also involved in the URM stuff, and so I've been pretty well informed in it. My real passion around this is more on the small business side, which often gets underrepresented, doesn't have a classification here, but small businesses are sometimes owners and sometimes tenants and sometimes both in a sense, like we are. And it's important to make sure that the business community has a voice in all of this also. So that's very, very important to me, as well as obviously for all of us, the safety issues. Everything we're talking about is a balance between safety and then all of the other special interests that are involved in it. So my special interest part is on the small business side mostly and the building owner side.
Thank you. Pastor Hills.
I'm on? Okay, great. I'm Pastor James Walter Hills II, pastor New Hope Missionary Baptist Church in Portland, Oregon. I am on the nonprofit side representing places of worship. I also serve as moderator for the Union District Baptist Association, which is a culmination of churches, African-American churches in the Northeast Portland area. And all of our churches, a lot of our churches are affected by the processes that are shaped. And we're here to be a part of the conversation to help disseminate information accurately to our community and be able to be a voice for those who do not feel like we were considered the first time that certain decisions were made.
Perfect. Thank you. Don?
Am I on now?
You are.
Okay.
You are.
Don Eggleston. I am the retired president of Sarah Architects and spent 50 years dealing in renovation projects, new construction in the city of Portland. 25 years ago, I co-chaired the two subcommittees that put together Chapter 2485, which is the current code being used. As John said, this is a very complicated issue, covers many, many, many different areas, and with the increased knowledge coming out of Dagami and the others, the force levels that the city of Portland could be subjected to with a full rupture of the Cascadia subduction zone fault, nobody here has ever experienced, unless you've been down in Christchurch, New Zealand. So we've got to do something with the 1,600 plus buildings that are on the city register for URMs. It's a very complicated issue. I think in the end, nobody's going to get everything they want, but we have to do something. And if we do it in a logical, rational approach, I think we can all get there and start laying a path for our children, our grandchildren, and their children as we move forward.
Don, thank you, and congratulations. You're the first member that I get to pick on throughout the process. You used an acronym illegally. You said Dogami, and tell us what that
Department
stands
of
for.
Oregon Geology and Mineral Industries.
Okay, you're now forgiven. All right. I believe Kathy was next, and then.
Hi.
Really close.
This on? Okay, my name's Kathy Rogers. Technically, I'm a representative of the community. I was nominated to be on the committee by the Hawthorne Boulevard Business Association. So I'm not only hopefully representing the needs of the Hawthorne Boulevard Business Associations, but all of the business associations across the city. I would also consider myself in the URM building owner category. My husband and I own a 34-unit apartment building in the Hawthorne district that is on the city's URM list, although there's some question as to whether or not it truly is a URM building. I would also consider myself a tenant advocate because we've got a lot of tenants and we provide affordable housing, and I would hate to see them displaced unnecessarily. I became aware of the URM project in 2017, where as a real estate broker, I went to a industry training that was actually put on by Tom Shostrom, and that's the first I had heard of it. And then became pretty actively involved as a spectator in the committee process the first time around. Why this work is important to me? With this committee, first of all, I'm very happy that Commissioner Hardesty has directed this committee to look for alternatives on a voluntary basis, as well as to seek funding to make it possible. Because to me, that's the key here. We all know the dangers of a seismic event. We all know the chaos it could create. Solving that and making our city as safe as possible is the big question, because as we all know, it's very, very, very costly. So what I would love to see come out of this is that we do find some funding that will help these buildings complete some seismic retrofits. And I believe that's a conversation well beyond the city. I think we need to reach out to folks at the state and federal level and help find us a way to do this.
Hi. All right. I'm Pippa Arend, local person. I grew up on 63rd and Sandy Boulevard. I represent the for-profits, although I also run a nonprofit. I run PAIR. It's a program for homeless kids in Northwest Portland. I represent, though, a URM building owner. I own a building. It's on Northwest 23rd. I live there. So I really want to echo the elements that I've heard from Anthony and also from Don. I'm really afraid, like my passion for being here is I'm really afraid of the disaster of gentrification. Like it won't be me. What I'm afraid of is it won't be me that gentrifies my building if something comes down in terms of a mandate. It'll be someone else. So in other words, local owners will be kicked out. We won't be able to afford it. Who will sweep in are the big developers who can. And that scares the shit out of me, right? So I want to protect myself. I want to protect my home. I want to protect my tenants. And I want to make sure that my youth at PAIR have places to move into, because they have vouchers, but I find over and over and over again, there's not enough affordable homes right now. So what I would like to see is that there's a lot of low-hanging fruit that can be done. Low-income housing, city-owned buildings, looking at the schools, looking at the water systems. We can make the city more resilient to a seismic event without negatively impacting issues such as gentrification and losing the places that our people can live and our small businesses can be housed.
Thank you, Pippa. And I just want the record to reflect that shit is a legal term. And it's actually bullus shitus is the Latin version of it, which can be appropriate from time to time. Sue. Yeah, it's good to know. I mean, you get a law degree if you go to all these meetings. It's part of the package.
Okay. I will do that. I'm Sue Levine. I am relatively new to Portland, but been here about a year and a half. I'm head of school at Cedarwood Walder School. Here I'm representing my church, St. James Lutheran Church, downtown in the nonprofit and places of worship categories. My passion for this comes first from my concern about the event itself and what it would mean for our city. My husband and I were disaster service workers in the county of Santa Clara, California, before we moved here. So we've seen enough videos and been through enough things to know that we need to do something. We need to be ready for this. My other passion is education in schools, and it concerns me that many of the schools we aren't even talking about them here. Our school is retrofitted, but we have our Iona building across the park that to expand to. That's not. My church has a daycare in the basement, and would have to be displaced through the process. So there's many considerations, and I'm interested in learning how we can all work together to make this good for everybody.
Thank you, Sue. Dave.
I'm Dave Bay. I am representing the for-profit community. I am on the board of directors for the Tudor Arms condominiums, which are on 18th and Cooch, across from St. Mary's. It's 54 units, built in 1915, 5 stories, unreinforced masonry. Very concerned there about how we would afford an upgrade, whether it be through Senate Bill 311 or if there's opportunity, since it's a historic building, to get some money from the National Park Service, or if we can beg, borrow, and steal the rest. I'm also a structural engineer by trade, and have worked on these URM retrofits, so I have some technical knowledge there. Very concerned. Some of the people, our building is relatively inexpensive, so a lot of people that live in the building don't have a whole lot of money and can't afford a $50,000-$60,000 special assessment to pay for this seismic upgrade. So that's what I'm here for.
Perfect. Thank you. Vic.
My name is Vic Savara, and somehow I don't like the word for-profit. Okay, it implies that I go home and I sit out there and I count my money, which I can do because I have so little of it. Okay. Okay, I think I prefer to be called, affordable housing provider. As people mentioned earlier, most people who live in buildings classified as URMs are paying low rent, and they're not tenants. Okay, they are friends. They've lived with me for a long time. So I own a building which is 100 years old. I also live in the building. So I have both a URM building owner classification as well as a tenant advocate. Okay, it's also my life in danger. So what are we doing here? My personal belief is we're not talking about URMs, we're talking about earthquake preparedness. I think that is the important part. I believe that if we look at the problem in a manner that involves everything, a person living in a nonprofit building is just the same as a person living in a affordable housing provider building. Okay, so I think that is very important to understand. Our discussion should not be oriented towards profit and non-profit, but towards people. I think that's all. Thank you.
I won't move. So I am on the nonprofit subcommittee. My name is Jennifer Eggers. I am the interest groups I represent are design and historic preservation. I am a structural engineer in Portland. I've been here for quite a bit. Past president of the Structural Engineers Association and current chair of the Vintage Building Committee. I've done quite a lot of work on seismic retrofits of existing buildings of all different types, and in particular unreinforced masonry buildings. I do a lot of work with school districts, school seismic upgrades, school seismic retrofits, evaluations. I also work with districts to help them prepare grant applications for State of Oregon Seismic Rehabilitation Grant Program to be able to rehabilitate some of their school buildings. But I'm really interested in being on this committee because I care deeply about the resiliency of Portland and in Oregon in general. I feel like there's a lot of work that we need to do to plan for our future resiliency. There are a lot of at-risk buildings in Portland, so I'm very happy to be on this group to work with all these great people and get to know everybody to work toward that goal, which it sounds like that's in a lot of people's minds is post-earthquake disaster resiliency. So that's about it.
Thank you much.
My name is Andrew Smith. I am I'm going to be participating in the nonprofit subcommittee. And as far as interest groups go, I kind of fit into two of them. First is design. I'm an historical architect at Henneberry Architects and have been working with old buildings and specifically historic buildings for most of my career. And then obviously then historic preservation. I'm on the Portland Historic Landmarks Commission and will be representing that commission as far as the not-for-profit subcommittee goes. I think I can probably summarize why this is important to me in a couple of different points. One is that, human lives matter, and we need to do everything we can to make sure that when and not if the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake happens, that we're doing everything we can to protect human life. And then secondly is, I believe that our cultural heritage is inextricably tied to our buildings and our built environment. And I want us to not only come through the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake with lives intact, but I'd also like for it to come through with our precious historic resources intact as well. So,
Andrew. Maya.
So I'm Maya Fody. I'm a preservation architect.
You need to be really close to the mic.
Apparently,
Sorry.
Get a little closer, please.
Maybe I will remove it. I'll bend over. Maya Fody, I'm the vice chair of the Portland Historic Landmark Commission, along with Commissioner Smith. I'm representing the not-for-profit group. I'm a historic architect. My interest is historic preservation. So it's hard to put in words all the reasons I'm interested in this. Number one, because I'm a historic architect, I work for a firm that's founded in California, where they have a variety of different mandatory seismic upgrades, and so we really specialize in historic buildings and seismic upgrades of historic buildings, and specifically URMs. Sorry, this is really annoying.
It is, and I'm very much apologetic.
Sorry. Maybe that's better. We've worked on the Oregon State Capitol, on Pittock Mansion, on, let's see, whatever the URM, Vista House. So all that to say, and I have children that go to Mount Tabor Elementary, which is a URM building. So there's the life safety issue that I think about all the time. But secondly, having touched all these buildings and having seen what it takes to upgrade these historic buildings, the cost and the amount of work, I guess my concern is really historic fabric, and how can we make these upgrades so they don't completely, well, number one, freak out people to the point that they demolish their buildings because they're not on the National Register. And number two, can we find upgrades? Are there specifically non-prescriptive upgrades? I mean, using FRP, are there ways to do this work that's less costly and less invasive to historic fabric with the end goal of saving lives, but also keeping our historic buildings intact? So that's what I like to really focus on, are the little details of how are we actually doing it. So
Okay, and can you give us the acronym FRP, I think it was?
oh, fiber reinforced polymer. It's a pretty good.
Yeah. You said the magic
versus
word.
Steel or concrete. It seems like there's so many different ways that we can sort of, yeah.
Okay, great. Carolina.
My name is Carolina Gomez, and I'm here to represent low-income housing. I work for Home Forward. We are the local housing authority. I'm here to represent our vulnerable population. You hear me a lot to talk about our population, making sure that most of the work that we do is going to be with the equity and inclusion lens, that we represent people with low, no income, people that is housed and homeless, and there's a lot of things that we will need to talk about. There is things that we will consider to talk about, the cost and the no cost things that we can do. The no cost things will be I don't know if this is working, but the right to know for the people that live, work, and is around our buildings. The right to know that is a URM. And there's a lot of things that we can do at no cost, including some of you talk about emergency preparedness, how we can evacuate and what we can do. And then it will be the cost and how are we paying for this, who is paying for this, and how are we gonna work with our communities to do this work. I do a lot of work on emergency preparedness, business continuity for our agency. So this work is related, and I'm very passionate about this work.
Thank you very much. Abe.
Nope. Any better? Okay. Is this working? Thank you. So I'm Abe Farkas. I'm on the nonprofit side of this at this point in time. Most of my background has been in redevelopment work in many cities around the country, most recently in Portland with the Portland Development Commission. I've also done community development work, been deeply involved in historic preservation, adaptive reuses, have lived in a URM building. And the focus, my interest group focus in this committee is public finance and partnership financing, public-private financing, which in my experience has been one of the pivotal ways in which communities can address these very complex issues. This is going to be particularly difficult for many of the reasons that have been already identified around the table. You want to mitigate displacement as much as possible. You want to have something that's economically viable, something that's equitable and fair. And I'm willing to collaborate and want to collaborate with folks around the table to see if we can find reasonable solutions.
Thank you, Abe. Bart.
Hi, yeah, my name's, is that working for you out there? My name's Bart Yannick. I'm with the for-profit subcommittee. I am a part owner of a URM building. I'm also owner-occupied. We run a business, Laurel Thirst Public House at 30th Northeast Gleason. And we also have 2 apartments above that house 2 families that have worked for us for over 10 years. We're a music venue. We do about 16 shows a week there. We are one of about 35 music venues that are on the URM list. And I'm here to try to work with everyone else here to find an equitable solution to the myriad of problems with the possibility of a natural disaster or earthquake in this area. We have affordable housing with the 2 apartments above. We are a small business. A lot of these URM buildings exist along neighborhood corridors that are just 1 or 2 story businesses. And Portland is rapidly changing right now, but it'd be great for us to find a way to look and solve for problems with seismic disasters, as well as develop our new Portland, sort of a coexisting vision moving forward. Our building's been there since 1910. It's been a bar since the turn of Prohibition. So we've been around for a long time, but a mandatory seismic upgrade may, unfortunately, depending on the cost, put us out of business and force us to sell to the building to somebody else, which me and many, many others wouldn't like to see. So Yeah, I'm looking forward to working with everyone here, pursuing standards for these seismic upgrades that are definite and finite, and also financing options for moving forward to make the city safer and affordable and preserve what we've had here for a long time.
Thank you, Bart. And I'm just wondering if, just a hypothetical question, if 70 people at 7:30 this evening showed up at your establishment, what is the open bar policy as far as cost? Because I think we have a room full of people. We can get a bus. We could be over there by 7:30.
We can talk about that between 5 and 6.
Okay, perfect, perfect. Thank you. Yes, Thomas. Oh, there you go.
My name is Thomas Aquinas. I'm representing the nonprofit group. I, however, do have interest in the community aspect, design, finance, and investors and developer at the same time. The reason I have multiple interests is because I'm a student at Portland State studying, getting a master's in real estate. I came into this committee because of what I learned in school. And to me, I find it very interesting how we as a committee are going to recommend how to finance this when most of the models in real estate finance are straightforward. You have an interest and you look for partners to help you solve your interest, and they also benefit. But how do we as a committee recommend to the city to fund, not, well, the city clearly indicated that they're not going to fund it, so we have to look for innovative way to fund this issue, which is very interesting to me. And what is happening in the schools right now is that we are talking of resilience, building resilient cities instead of, we don't usually use the word URM very often, which is very interesting to me that I sit on a committee that you hear the word URM, but in schools, all that we are focused on is building resilient city in case of a disaster. And it has a lot of connections to how you finance the buildings, how banks looked at your building right now. But we are also told that we need to maintain the historic feature of the city. So it's a balancing act that we have to do, and I'm very interested to see how we can work around this to make everyone happy. Thank you.
Okay, it'll happen as soon as I can. Thank you, Thomas. Sorry. Peter, have you got?
Was on? How about that?
There
Okay. Peter Angel, I'm on the for-profit subcommittee. Fit into a couple different interest groups. The first is finance. I spent, prior to moving back to my hometown of Portland, 8 years in San Francisco, and personally financed about $3 billion of commercial real estate, a lot of which were URMs. I'm also an investor and a URM building owner. My goal here would be to find a way to fund these voluntary retrofits in an equitable way that addresses life safety while also considering displacement of apartment tenants, small businesses, and also finding a way to keep the fabric of the city that I think we all love.
Thank you. Has every member had a chance to share with us? Last call. All right, we're going to do one quick exercise, and then, unless you object, we're going to take a 10-minute break to get new microphones. Is that okay with anyone? I mean, if you don't want to, we can. All right. So, what this is as close to team building and trust falls as we're getting. Hopefully, it'll be painless. And here we go. So, what I'm going to ask by just show of hands from the members of the committee to see what we have in common and what we don't. Some of this is serious and some of this is lighthearted. So, How many of you like team bonding exercises? Raise your hand. So, okay, more than I thought, good, okay. How many of you live in North Portland? Raise your hand. North Portland. Northeast Portland, okay. South Portland. Southeast Portland. Southwest Portland. And Northwest Portland. Okay, so we've got some geographic diversity here. How many of you own and or manage a URM? Own or manage a URM? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 8 or 9. And then we have some members of the committee will come in. How many of you live in a URM? You can answer more than once to these questions. So we have 1, 2, 3. How many of you, and this is going to be very telling, how many of you like cats? Because that's what I'll be herding for the next year. How many of you believe difficult questions need to be discussed candidly? Raise your hand. All right. Okay. How many of you like dogs? Oh, more dog lovers. How many want to increase public safety? Okay. How many of you are right-handed? How many of you are left-handed? Hey, just you and me, okay? How many of you are ambidextrous? Oh, Vic. Yeah. Don't be sorry, be proud. Okay. How many of you want to be heard and to hear others? Raise your hand. Okay. How many want an equitable outcome for everyone? Raise your hands. How many of you want to stop doing group exercises and start doing the work so we can get home sooner rather than later? Raise your hand. All right, we got a lot in common. So what we're going to do is take approximately a 10-minute and 13-second break while the city crew is going to change out these microphones, and hopefully we'll have better audio. So on your mark, get set, break. Attention, attention. Let's reconvene, folks. Let's reconvene. Kathy Rogers, remove back to your seat. Move back to your seat. All the way through. All right, folks, please have a seat. We gave you an extra break. Don't abuse it. All right. So as people are settling in, a couple things for the audience perspective. We have 2 binders that have all of the meeting materials. 2 binders here that have all the meeting materials. They are going to be posted to the website as well, so you have access to them on the website. Also, there are public comment. Well, there's sign-in sheets for the public, especially if you want to be on the email list of all committee proceedings. Please give us your email. And there's also a box if you want to participate in the public comment period. That's here too. So we don't have a rush at the end if, as is convenient, to go in and give us both that information. That would be great. And thank you for coming back so promptly to your seats. And for the work group members, we're going to pass around your sign-in sheet. So even if you signed previously, please sign here. You get a free drink at Bart's Bar if you sign in to 10 meetings in a row. Is the new deal. Here, all right. So next item on the agenda is. It's called Collaboration 101. So what is Collaboration 101? I've done many of these public policy processes, and I think it's important to come up with a common vocabulary and some concepts that are here for your consideration. Over the years, I've found that some of these concepts become a perspective where people can explore these issues as opposed to simply debating them. As a mediator, I don't mind good old-fashioned debate, but you can disagree without being disagreeable, and part of this training is designed to do that. So it's how are we going to work together across our differences? Well, this is kind of the basics of collaboration 101. So conflict is a natural tension. It exists in almost every relationship, be it personal, business, or professional. And it oftentimes looks like this. And this is a cartoon in the back of two people blowing their snow on each other's sidewalks. And the line says, and my definition of conflict is when someone insists that they are right and you or ignorant one are wrong. And I know everyone sitting in this, around this table in this room has never started a conflict or an argument in their life. It was always the other person who said something assholian that compelled you to respond in kind. Okay? And so what happens is we get into this attack, justify, blame spiral, and we stop being rational and stop exploring, and we debate and we defend. It's the classic attack, justify, blame spiral. So how can we be more effective in having conflictual and collaborative conversations? Typical conflict looks like this from the mediator's perspective. I'll listen to your unreasonable demands if you'll consider my unacceptable offer. So parties come in listening for disagreement, listening to fix blame, and both believe and self-justify their behavior with the thing that we used to do on the playground, which was, well, he started it. And so that's just a normal part of human interaction. This is caused by what us mediators call the intersection of logic and emotion. So what does that mean? These processes happen in the intersection of logic and emotion. I've mediated cases on Wall Street, and I've never mediated a case that was just about money. There's always some underlying value, need, and interest, some feelings, some perspectives that compel us to avoid facts and focus on emotions. So I see my job, part of it, is to help everyone navigate through this intersection of logic and emotion. And it looks like this. A stimuli happens. Someone says something in the room or doesn't say something you think they should. They do something or don't do something you think they should. That's the stimuli. We go into this intersection and us humans spin. We first filter what happened here through the lenses of our negative experiences. I knew I couldn't trust him, her, it. This has happened before, it's going to happen again. This is part of basic survival. Counteracting that intersection of logic and emotion is our wisest perspectives, our best selves, our hopes to see good and help and do good in the community. Someone makes a factual statement. We want it verified. We also are concerned, and we have it difficult to verify facts because we have these cognitive biases, these thoughts that preclude us from thinking clearly. So one is called the availability challenge. So as a mediator, I see party A present what they perceive to be a fact. Party B will be listening for disagreement and only focus on the piece that is wrong. Okay? And part of that is we only look for information that supports our preconceived mindset. It's a normal human reaction. We tend to look for disagreement as opposed to look for agreement. And I appreciate, given what many of you have been through and are going through now, that is asking for a leap of faith. I get it. And I'm not asking you, I mean, can you imagine if I said, trust me, I'm a lawyer, what, reaction that would get from the group? So we have to build that over time and see what we can develop to go through that. Well, what happens in this intersection of logic and emotion, we have a choice. We can stay in a neutral place and explore the advantages and disadvantages of what the other person said, its veracity or not veracity, the various perspectives going forward. But it's human nature to have negative thoughts or reactive thoughts, and then we're loaded for bear, fight and flight kicks in. Or we can look to the future and say, here we are now, what are we going to do going forward? And I tried to be, as you'll see throughout this process, as transparent as I can with why I'm doing what I'm doing. The only trick about my mediator technique is that there are no tricks. I tried to be just totally transparent about it. So an example is, I can pretty much tell with reasonable certainty whether each of you are in a reactive mode or a proactive mode or in an exploratory mode by simply listening to your choice of verb tenses. So people who are in the present exploring say things are, here we are now. We have a job to do. We have a scope to accomplish. People that are looking to the future use present tense verbs. What do we do about that? How can we make this better? Where do we go from here? People that are in a reactionary mode use past tense verbs. Andrew, how come you're the only left-handed person in this room? You promised you would switch your hand dexterity to be a member of this committee along with your colleagues. You promised you would do that. And it tends to come with the finger of accusatory blame. And we speak in the past tense. It's a little technique. As you sit there in the room, decide, do you want to speak in the past tense? That's your right. Do you want to speak in the present tense? That's your right. And do you want to speak in the future tense? That's your right. But people are getting the message by just listening to your choice of verbs. So why do we get stuck in that intersection? Because emotions, for better or worse, are the dominant driver when we have to make different decisions. I interviewed a good half of you plus, and there is a legitimate fear in the room based on what's happened in the past and what could happen today. I'm not asking you as the mediator to abandon that or discount that or just poo-poo that. It is very real. The question is, how are we going to manage that and go forward? So why do we get stuck? We think about conflict as a negative. Well, conflict also is an opportunity to sit down, uncover hidden agendas and get the job done. We do not trust ourselves to manage the tensions effectively. How many people love to be in conflict? Could you please raise your hand? Thank you in the back. You can be the poster child for the program. He's the only one that raised his hand. All right. There you go. Okay? And Anthony was questionable too. So we failed to acknowledge conflict as normal, folks. Conflict is normal. Okay? We lack curiosity about the cause of the conflict. That's when I say we're here to explore versus debate, is we need to actually dive below the waterline of adversarial banter and explore what the hell's really going on here and how we can fix it. We fail to focus on the benefits of collaboration, and sometimes we lack skill in doing that, and that's part of the reason for this training. Okay? So the analogy here about conflict in these processes is akin to two icebergs butting up against each other. What we learned from watching the movie Titanic is that the majority of the iceberg was below the waterline, and only 10% of it was above the waterline. Well, these two icebergs are two teams, two parties trying to come together and trying to form a team, trying to reach agreement and common understanding. It's difficult because perceived differences, scarce resources, inaccurate information, unfulfilled needs, and power struggles happen, and it's not safe for people to take a leap of faith. In interviewing the people I interviewed with, it was common and not surprising, but it never ceases to amaze me. I hear things from two totally different perspectives, from parties who are proceeding in good faith, who are trying to do the right thing and speak their truth. And as the neutral third party, the impartial third party, I'm hearing these different perspectives that I can't reconcile. And other than to say, we've got to put them on the table and see what we can do and do some lateral thinking going forward. Well, what happens in the default conflict mode is at the top of this pyramid or iceberg rather is our position. And that's what each party says they want. Okay? So party A says, I want X. And the party B says, no to X. I want the opposite of X. And so it's positional. And so what parties tend to do in conflict from the mediator's perspective is you state your position, you state your position, you say, oh yeah, you say, oh yeah, and then we're done with the positional stage of the process, having not gotten anywhere, each time expecting the other person to capitulate simply because you shared a position different than them. But part of our cultural norm is when exchange of positions doesn't work, we come up with arguments to support our position. And this is the epiphany I had when I sat on the trial bench. And watching my colleagues do, frankly, what I did day in and day out before I sat on the bench, is Kathy will state her position and come up with argument A. And David will state his position and come up with argument number 1. Kathy says to your number 1, well, my B is my response. You say B, 2. And he says 2, C. And you go 3, C, 3. And this goes on and on and on. And eventually someone gets tired and thinks they won. And everyone has to respond to every argument because subconsciously we're saying to ourselves, I can't let David or Kathy have the last argument because if I do, they will think they won. So I have to respond to every argument with a counter argument. And the analogy I had sitting on the bench was, at the end, as I instructed the jury, I had this image of saying, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this concludes the evidentiary portion of the proceedings. I've now given you the legal instructions. You must now retire and deliberate to determine who had the last argument. But that we're on autopilot and we act as though that is what's going to happen. It really is, we regress to the playground. Oh yeah, yeah. So what I'm going to do is invite you to dive below this waterline of adversarial banter. So this is the waterline of adversarial banter. Arguments, positions to support the arguments. If we do that, this is going to be a debate. And if we need to debate, we'll debate if it's productive and gets us to common goals and results. From a mediator's perspective, we ask you for your positions and arguments. We invite you to dive below the waterline, to look at what are your values? What are your fears? What are your concerns? What are your hopes and dreams? What do those look like? And to the extent there are differences, we'll focus first on common interests and base options and suggestions based on what you have in common. Then we'll brainstorm solutions, then we'll explore the options, and then we'll negotiate a resolution. So there's some hidden words in here that have meaning again from a mediator's perspective. What are options? It's an acronym. Only proposals that include others' needs succeed. Only proposals that include others' needs succeed. So if any of us have a proposal And it basically says, colleagues on the committee, I want X because it works for me, and it doesn't work for anybody else. It's not an option. This is reverbing again, sir, and there's nothing you can do. Okay. I'm standing under the microphone. Feelings.
Testing.
Whoa.
Karaoke, anyone?
Thank you. I'm here all evening. Try the roast beef. So options, only proposals that include others' needs succeed. We need to set a table, and this will take time because it only happens when we trust and respect each other, and there's a lot of repair work that needs to be done. I get it. Okay. And then we can negotiate resolutions. So above this water line is a debate. The best you're going to get is a settlement. Below this water line is something richer and durable. It's called a resolution. So let me give you an insight into the wild and crazy world of the law. When you go to judge school, you learn that a, quote, good settlement is when everyone walks away equally and happy. That's what they teach us, okay? Everyone walks away equally unhappy. When you go to mediator school, instead of looking for a settlement, we're looking for a resolution. What's a resolution? It's when all of the parties walk away with their underlying personal and business and familial needs reasonably satisfied. You get a settlement if you stay above the water line and do position and argument, okay? If you want something richer and durable, we're going to have to dive below that water line and look for a resolution. Look, I've read the past documents. I've looked at what has happened. How many of you look back at the past processes and say, wow, those were great? Anyone? Okay, so we get it. It's doing the same old thing over and over again is the operative definition of insanity, as we know. So the goal here today is to see what we can do differently this time. So you have a choice here between these various issues, a settlement or a resolution. So here is the second exercise, team building, bonding exercise that, because some of you were so enthusiastic about doing it the first time, we have another one for you. Let's just have the committee members do this now. But I'm going to ask you to take a leap of faith and please stand and push in your chairs. If you could please stand, push in your chairs. And we'll get to watch them and see what we can do with them. Look here. Now, form a team of two. I need a dyads. So Pastor Tate and Bart, you face each other about 3 feet apart. You two come together, face each other. You two face each other, face each other, face each other, face each other. You get to be a threesome over there, David. Face each other, face each other. All right. Here is your position. Here is your position. If you are to win this exercise, you've got to convince that Yahoo, and I say that in the most respectful sense, to cross over to your side of the line. If you're to win, you got to convince that person to cross over to your side of the line. Look down on the carpet between you. There's a line halfway between each of you. Okay, you see it? You can say or do anything you want to, but you can't reach over and grab the person over in a headlock. Okay? You have got 46 seconds to convince your opponent to cross over in order to win. Ready? Negotiate! All right, freeze. It's only an exercise, you two. Let it go. This is not real life. Have a seat. Everyone have a seat. Let me explain the trick to this tool. Each of your positions was, come over to my side of the line. You said, come over. They said, thank you for sharing. I like your theme, but no, you come over to my side of the line. What were some of the arguments you used that did not work? What were some of the arguments you tried to say or do that did not work? Yes, sir.
If you see it from my side, it looks a lot better.
Okay, good. So you're kind of fibbing there, Pastor, a little bit. Yeah. What else?
Things will work out a whole lot better when you come over to my side.
Same theme. You know, you're in the same business. Same theme. Same thing. Same theme going on. What else did you try that didn't work? Yeah. Gender-based cajoling. We're talking power dynamics here, right? Yeah. All right. Anyone else try something didn't work? Oh, the chocolate. Very good. And some of you may have done this because I was busy watching and doing it. But let me just ask each of you this question. How come y'all didn't just immediately switch sides? Let me replay the tape of the instructions. I said if you were to win, you had to convince them to come over to your side of the line. Being good North Americans, you assumed that if you crossed over, you would lose. But I never said that. That is our default mindset in these conflicts. I mean, you can imagine with a body like this, just a minute. Let me try to get that up. Okay. I was an all-conference collegiate athlete. Anyone want to guess the sport? Full contact chess. No. Okay. Well, the coach, I would love the coaches. Coaches tend to scratch when they talk. And what would coaches say? Men, winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. And then my all-time favorite, I kid you not, my all-time favorite, it's halftime. Brings us into the locker room. Men, the score is tied. You know, I want to go, duh. I mean, is that what those similar numbers mean on the board? Tying is like, oh, Kathy got it. Tying is like, quote, kissing your sister, unquote. That was the expression. That was our mindset. Kathy, anything you need to share with us about how? All right. This is part of our mindset. We argue because we don't know another way. We assume that if we give even a scintilla of an inch, it will be used against us. I get it. It's based on past hurt and trust. I'm not asking you to let go of that. I'm asking you to be aware of it and decide how we can make this process different than all the processes that went past in this issue. And that's a lot of work, folks. We got a lot of work to do. The bottom line is this. Each of us have a choice throughout this process. We can either build a case and fix a blame against someone else, or we can build a relationship or fix the problem. Think about that for a minute. We can build a case and fix blame, or we can build a relationship and fix the problem. I haven't seen anyone be able to do both at the same time. Yes. You crossed the line? No, how did you win?
I asked her, do you want to come to my side? She said no, and I told her I don't want to go to yours, so let's get closer. We both change, and we both look at the same direction, standing in our side.
Very well. Would you like a job as co-facilitator? Come on.
She was pretty quick, actually.
Come on up with that example. All right. So that's our choice. Build a case and fix blame, or build a relationship and fix the problem. All right. So any questions, comments, lawyer jokes, thoughts about what we've talked about vis-a-vis how to be in the room? John. And we need to get you the mic, John. Who's our mic person, please?
Testing. That would be me.
Okay, thank you so much. And we're going to have to pass mics this time. Again, sincere apologies, but it's Anthony's fault. We're blaming him.
Sam, the implication is that this is sort of a bilateral thing. It's either one or the other. Where is there a place for education? Because this is such a complicated topic. Where is there a place where we can learn from each other?
So later on in this meeting, there is a document called the work plan. That work plan is a draft document. It lists some very broad, high-level topics for which I believe, based on talking to you and what you said to me, there is, at a minimum, misinformation or not hearing and understanding each other. You know, for instance, just to pick a topic at random, apparently there's a list that has URMs on it and the court dealt with it, okay? I have heard so many stories about this list and what it did and didn't do. I'm not here to judge it. We are here to explore it and determine facts like that for common education. Because it's like really listening and coming out of a meeting and going, I don't know if these two people on the committee have ever met, because their views on that issue couldn't be further apart and different. So absolutely, we're not going to get anywhere without that common education. Pastor Tate, look at you, the microphone.
I think that one of the problems that we had initially was we did not build relationships. Building relationships helped tremendously in order for us, the problem to continue, but nobody wanted to come together and build any relationship. So I like the fact that it's there about building relationships, because building relationships helps us to understand each other and what we're trying to go. Just a few moments knowing this guy, I didn't know him from a can of paint, but I believe that we built, and he invited me over and I can have a free drink.
So we're good. We're good. And so, Bart, since the topic has come up, if you were a can of paint, what color would you be? No, I'm just kidding. All right. Other thoughts, comments about sort of general collaboration, conflict resolution, thoughts for exploring versus debating? Lawyer jokes? No? What's the definition of crying shame? Bus full of lawyers going over a cliff with one seat empty? No? How do you tell when it's really, really cold out? Us lawyers have our hands in our own pockets. Okay. Free drink at Bart's facility for anyone that can tell me a lawyer joke I haven't already heard. Okay?
How can you tell when a lawyer is telling a lie?
His lips are moving. Yeah. You just lost your free drink. You lost your free drink. All right. Last call. All right, what's next here? So this is, we're doing a little out of order, but I think the flow is better here. Jonna, whose last name I cannot pronounce, will come up and pronounce her name and run us through an exercise in the correct pronunciation of the name, is going to talk about the history of the code from the city's perspective. And talk a little bit about what happened in the past and what, to date, the city has done, just some of the stuff, many more they plan to do, surrounding how we got here. So the clicker here, I'll advance, and there is your microphone. That's your clicker. Or do you want me to click for it?
Can you click for me?
I'd be delighted to click. It's my highest and best use. Clicking.
Hi, am I sounding okay back there? Awesome, thank you. My name is Jonna Papa Eftimiou, and I work for the City of Portland at the Bureau of Emergency Management, where my title is Planning, Policy, and Community Programs Manager. And I have been working on the Unreinforced Masonry building project since it started in 2014. Okay, I'm going to start out by giving us some history about the project in particular and about the city code. That these slides were developed with assistance from the Bureau of Development Services, and they're intended to be as neutral as we knew how to be in talking about how we got to the place where we are now. And at the same time, I want to acknowledge that stuff I'm talking about is contentious, that I'm starting out talking about the inventory, which was part of the lawsuit. And I think it's something that we'll come back to in this group over time. And we'll unpack quite a bit more. But I and some others that I see here have been around for a long time, but some folks are new to this. And so this is intended just to give us a starting point. The starting point was in 1993 when the Oregon Building Code was updated. It was in the early 90s that we started to understand in Oregon that we had a big risk from the Cascadia subduction zone and that we could have a massive earthquake here. Prior to that, we didn't believe that we had much earthquake risk in Portland. So the state building code was changed in 1993, and a result of that, most of the existing buildings in Portland were considered dangerous buildings. And so the city undertook a process to figure out what should we do about this, the dangerous building designation. Also at that time, the city undertook a survey of all the existing buildings in Portland except for 1 and 2 family dwellings. You can imagine to try and survey every building in the city back in the early 90s. This was using paper maps and paper forms. A lot of people touched that inventory trying to get something that, that we thought would be adequate. And they, at the end of that time, they produced the first database, which was not on the internet because there wasn't an internet. As a result of that work, the committee and the inventory, in 1996, we adopted new requirements for existing buildings that required seismic upgrades for buildings when they came into the city to do re-roof or make another remodel of their building. And I want to acknowledge that we were also working with a permit system then that was primitive compared to our current technology. And so the city recognizes that this code, although it was always our intention to enforce it uniformly and fairly, that there are certainly folks who came in and got permits for a URM building and weren't informed that their building was a URM, and that has caused us and them a lot of heartache in the years since. But so we continued forward with this code from 1996. In 2004, we updated our code additionally because of other changes to the building code and evolving science around buildings. And then in 2011, a couple things happened. There was the Tohoku earthquake, which is an earthquake in Japan on the other side of the Cascadia subduction zone. I'm sure folks here heard something about it. It's caused a tsunami, a nuclear meltdown. It was a terrible disaster in Japan, and that drew a lot of people's attention to the other side of that fault, which affects us here in Oregon. And so as a part of that, the state legislature directed the Oregon State Seismic Policy Advisory Commission to make a statewide plan to talk about resilience and how we could address earthquake risk. Also around that time, the Christchurch earthquake happened. Some folks here may also be familiar with that incident. Christchurch is a city in New Zealand that is in many ways similar to Portland. In terms of it has a river running through it, it is a similar population. It was developed at the same time, and it also has a lot of URM buildings that were damaged and harmed people in that earthquake. Thanks. So as a result of kind of different things, oh yes.
Can you go back one slide, please? You mentioned that the state, no, that's okay, that the state talked about resilience during an earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
The state did not specifically say URM. Is that correct?
No, the report, you're right, it was extremely broad, so it covered many systems, transportation, utilities, and it highlighted a lot of places where the state is vulnerable. It did talk about URM buildings, and also there are other kinds of buildings that are vulnerable in an earthquake, and those were highlighted as an important risk, but the state report was about all those things. It wasn't just about URM buildings or even just about buildings. Thank you. Please.
So, is the implication that buildings built prior to 1993, actually are most of the city's skyscrapers, they are by definition dangerous?
Amit, I'm looking at a structural engineer because he is much more qualified to answer that question. Do you want to, can I hand you the mic?
Yeah, my name is Amit Kumar. I'm a supervising structural engineer at the City of Portland Bureau of Development Services. So in 1993, the building code changed where the seismic, what we call as the base shear, went up by about 150% on that. And that what we at that time we had what was called as the dangerous building code in the City of Portland. So anything that was had more than 50% of the existing base shear would be quantified as building as a dangerous building. That code has been revoked, so it's no longer classified as a dangerous building from a lateral standpoint. We still have it for gravity kind of stuff in there. So, and that was the reason why a task force was formed in 1993 to study that effect in there. So there is no dangerous classification, as you will, from a code perspective.
I guess, if I may. I guess the fundamental point I'm trying to make is that all of this, these are shades of gray. There's no such thing as either a safe, well, there is a safe building. It's the Pioneer Courthouse. But virtually every other building in the city is to some degree or another unsafe. And where you draw that line and how you define that line, I think, matters a lot. There are unsafe buildings that are steel buildings, that are concrete buildings, not just masonry buildings. So I take exception to the title of URM as a definition of an unsafe building.
And that'll be certainly something we're going to explore all of it because, by way of explanation, not justification, the intent of the city in doing these slides was just to get people who haven't have the same familiarity with everything else. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be accurate. It should be accurate. And these kinds of clarifications we're happy to entertain. But please know that the fact that something appears on the slide here doesn't mean it's truth for purposes of us going forward and deciding. It is important to clarify them so that people who don't know the things that, for instance, what you just said, know them. So I'm not trying to cut off the comments. I'm trying to say, let's make them, but it's not the time to debate them. We're going to have a full background stuff on all of these things. I had Dave first, then Pippa.
One clarifying question to, is there anybody on the committee that doesn't agree with the statement that generally speaking, unreinforced masonry buildings are more vulnerable during a seismic event
Then what?
than buildings made of wood, than buildings made of steel, than buildings made of concrete? Is there anybody that disagrees with that statement?
Well, according to the Oregon Resiliency Plan, soft story and non-ductile. Yeah. According to the Oregon Resiliency Plan, soft story concrete and non-ductile concrete and soft story buildings have the same resiliency as URMs.
So yes, you disagree with that statement.
I disagree that URMs are more at risk than some other buildings. That there are some buildings that have the same seismic resiliency as URMs. That's the only point I'm trying to make. And of course, liquefaction zones make a big deal.
I'm just speaking in general terms, but in general terms, I think you can make a statement like that unreinforced masonry buildings are vulnerable in seismic events. There are other buildings that are vulnerable as well, and other structures that are vulnerable as well, but this is what we have.
So,
actually, this relates to this because Jonna brought up Christchurch, which is often brought up in this context. But in Christchurch, of course, 185 souls lost their lives. Of those that were actually in buildings, it was only 4 people that died actually in unreinforced masonry buildings. It was 133 that were in reinforced buildings, just as a statement. So again, it's about liquefaction and some other issues.
Outside.
And then, of course, many people are outside as well. But of the people that were in buildings, it was 4 versus 133.
So let me I promise to get you, Caroline, in a second. Let me just use this as an example for this training. good that you're having these questions and clarifications. And as several of you have said, this stuff is so complicated. In the history, there's disagreement on the underlying facts. There's disagreement on the underlying history. And just being transparent, the concern I have as a mediator is how to help you have a conversation when in the past, if someone said on this topic, it's daylight out, an opponent would say, not in all parts of the world. And then I would have to mediate which one person's truth is more accurate. So all of these issues are going to come up. And I guess and let's do it. We got to get it done, and we got to be transparent, and we have to move forward and figure it out. Because this is an example I said of talking to various people. I can't tell you how many times I heard stories about Christ Church, and to save my children's soul, I cannot say accurately, what it is. And as far as my son's soul, but Carolina.
What happened in 1993 that we started talking about this? Because 1993 is not that far in the past to start having this conversation. So what happened?
Is that working again? That's true. So geologist, I'm not a geologist either, but and I was a kid in 93. He knows everything. But in 1990, in the early 90s, geologists they had believed that the Cascadia subduction zone fault on our side of the Pacific Ocean was no longer active, that it wasn't moving anymore, and so we couldn't have an earthquake from that. And then geologists and also archaeologists found in the historical record information about an earthquake that happened in 1700. They could see discontinuities in the soil, like where campfires and things had been all of a sudden buried under a whole bunch of sand, and where living trees had been buried under a whole bunch of sand. And so they were seeking to explain, like, how did this, what event caused this? It seems like a tsunami. And when they looked in the historical record in Japan, which has a long written record of that time, they saw that Japan also experienced a tsunami, I think February 22nd, 1700. That was an orphan tsunami, so they had a huge tsunami without having an earthquake. And so they realized the earthquake was on our side of the Pacific. It was here in Oregon, and it was so huge that not only did it bury all this land on the North American side, but it also caused a tsunami all the way across the ocean in Japan. And that woke them up to the idea that maybe that fault was still active because it had been active in 1700. And so from that, they did more explorations and they realized, yeah, this fault is still moving. Sure. That was an easy one, thanks. Do you want to flip it? All right, so all these things swirling, Christchurch, Tohoku, the resilience plan, we were all kind of getting woke about earthquakes. And then in 2014, the city council had a working session. It was a different council then, back in 2014. And they asked staff from my bureau, Emergency Management, to work with staff from the Bureau of Development Services and with Prosper Portland to put together a committee and make recommendations to reduce the hazards of URM buildings. And in fact, 3 committees were created. First, there was sort of a technical advisory committee that was made up of architects and engineers. And then there was a financial support committee that was made up of investors and real estate owners, people who sort of finance those kinds of buildings. And then some people from those 2 earlier committees joined together with other folks like schools, affordable housing, representatives to make this bigger sort of conference committee, is how it was intended, to make overall recommendations to the city council. There were some problems with the process, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, both in terms of how the city's intentions were good, absolutely, in creating that committee and in picking people that we thought would be good stakeholders, but our process for selecting them was not transparent. It was people were handpicked for that committee. And also that committee did not have the benefit of an awesome facilitator like Sam, nor did they have super clear ground rules like the ones that we are going to go over in the future. And so that was and also, I mean, I think that's reflected in this was a project that was supposed to take a year, and it took us like 4 years to get to city council. and talk about it and make recommendations. When we came to City Council, the council did not adopt the recommendations that came forward from the committee, but rather what they adopted were some staff recommendations to require placarding and tenant notification in URM buildings. So to put up a sign on the front of the building that said it was a URM and to tell tenants before they rented in the building that it was a URM. They also asked us to have a do-over on the committee. So staff went forward with those council recommendations. The first one to come back was about placarding and tenant notification. Council had asked staff to do that before the end of the year. And it came forward and was passed by council. And then almost immediately it was challenged by property owners who, for a variety of reasons that I'm sure we'll talk about more in the process, filed a lawsuit against the city. And in fact, the city was pretty quickly enjuncted against enforcing the placarding and or the tenant notification. And in the time that it took from us to pass that placarding and tenant notification to the time that we got told in court that we couldn't do that, a lot of other things changed. The director of my bureau changed twice. The several seats on the city council turned over, and some commissioners who had at first thought this sounded like a good idea, upon reflection realized that they didn't want to take a position on it or that they couldn't support it. And so it didn't make sense for us to keep, the city made a decision, it didn't make sense for us to keep fighting this in court. And rather, the new majority on the city council repealed placarding and tenant notification, which happened just in October of this year. And after that happened, on the same day, council said, okay, let's start again on this process. And they adopted Resolution 37455, which appointed the members of this committee now to join us to be the new URM building work group. And they also adopted the bylaws that we're going to look at in a minute. And that brings us to where we are now with the new committee in the first meeting. Do people have any questions? Yes.
Overrode the committee. You mentioned that. So what is there which would prevent that from happening to our committee?
I'm so glad you asked that because that's almost my next slide. And I knew I could count on you, Vic. Thank you. But do I have another question? Okay. That was not a question? Cool. So thank you. So I so regret that that Juanita Range is not here. She is a person who suggested this quote to me as a way to kind of reflect on what happened in our earlier process. And I think that it spoke to me a lot because what I've realized in the time that we've worked on this to come to now is that when we started this process, the city kind of drew a circle around the things that we saw were important or relevant to this work. And what was in the circle was architecture, it was engineering, it was geology, it was finance. And we focused on those things that we as the city determined were relevant. And everything else kind of fell outside the circle. Can you give me the next slide? And what we learned from that process, what I learned and other folks in the city learned, is that when we approach projects in this way, when we do business as usual, when we decide what's relevant, that we don't do things in an equitable way, because that is not the history of our city. And in fact, business as usual for the city of Portland, if you look at our history, is really a profound history of racism. And so that was embodied in our past process, not because I think we did things necessarily in a worse way than in the past, but because we did them in the same way. And that was a painful revelation for folks that, speaking for myself as someone that worked on this project, and particularly I would say for people that I work with in emergency management, because the work that I do is profoundly about building resilience in the community. And about keeping people safe in disasters. And we know that consistently, the communities that suffer most in disasters, that get hit first and worst over and over again, are communities of color. They're immigrants and refugees. They're folks who don't speak English well. They're people with disabilities. They're all the historically underserved communities that also have been in the past victims of racism. And so when we start out to do a process to help people and we don't start in a different way, then we can't help people. So that was pretty tough for us to realize. And I think I feel really grateful to have a new director and also to work for Commissioner Hardesty, who is a historic commissioner in the city of Portland in a lot of ways, and has really supported us to acknowledge that and to move forward in a better way. Next slide.
Yeah, I'm glad that John brought that up, because I was a part of some of that which you're talking about in the back, and it was important to us that we had somebody who didn't work for the city. And, I mean, he's a facilitator, he's independent. You don't work for the city. Anyway, it was important to us to have somebody who didn't work for the city to help facilitate, because we understand and we know we're not banging the city upside the head, but a lot of things just wasn't done correctly. And it caused major problems and uproar. And so I'm glad that we're at this point back to the table to try to get things done.
And I would share, I am very grateful that you were willing to come back to the table and be a part of this conversation again. And I thank you. And I have to actually specifically also thank your son, Troy Tate, who gave me a tour of your church and spent a whole afternoon with me talking about the work of your congregation and the folks there, and let me meet a lot of people. I'm hopeful that we will all at some point have an opportunity to visit, actually. So, I don't want to equate all of the shortcomings of our process with the really profound harms that that racism in Portland has caused on communities of color. Like that's something that that's so much bigger than I think anything that we'll touch on in this process, to be honest, and such a long history. At the same time, we kind of got to acknowledge we did not give awesome customer service to anybody in this process, right? Including communities that in the past this city government has served historically much better. And in a sort of a weird way, I think if we did anything in this process that advanced equity, it was we managed to create an awesome and historic coalition of people opposed to our work on unreinforced masonry buildings. Yes, you're united. It was NAACP was right there next to Pearl District real estate investors, and they're all saying, "F the city, this is messed up." Yeah, so in a funny way, maybe that helped us. I'll say it did. Yeah. And now we're going to have to think about what are we going to do different. And this is not a comprehensive list. I'm sure that you all can think of many more opportunities for us to improve. But as a start, we'd like to say that we did an open application process. We posted on the internet. We encouraged a lot of people to apply. I didn't pick anybody. Sam didn't pick anybody. We had a committee of community engagement experts that work at the city and are on boards already that did the selection. We're going to provide clear guidance on conflicts of interest and what folks need to disclose. And in fact, I have even dragged a city attorney here in person to help us answer those questions so we can all feel clear on the same page about that. It's our intention to have a more inclusive process, both in the membership of this committee and also to continue to go out and engage the community as we go forward. As we already said, we have a professional facilitator. Something else that also I think plagued our last process is that we didn't have a clear decision-making process, so we could never seem to finish, and we could never seem to agree when we reach consensus. And Sam's going to help us agree at the beginning about how we'll know that that's done. We have adequate resources to do this project. We also spend a lot of time in the last process arguing about how much it's going to cost, how long is it going to take, and we didn't have the resources to really to engage outside experts to inform us on that. But in this process work, if we need a consultant, if we need a third party to tell us how to do the work, then we have budget for that. And if we need more, we will go for more, but we won't make decisions where we feel like we're not well informed. And then finally, to Vic's point, is that in the past, the committee was advisory to staff, and it was always the expectation that staff would process the recommendations of the committee, that they would negotiate with council, that they would kind of shop it around the city, and then they would make their own recommendation to the city council that was including the committee's work, but also their own ideas. This time, the recommendation comes directly from this committee to city council, and the intention is that staff doesn't get to put their oar in and have an opinion one way or another, that the recommendations will be this group speaking to council. So those are some of the process improvements that we're committed to, and I know with Sam will help us identify other ways that we can continue to improve. But I really look forward to. I'm grateful for the opportunity to do this again, and I look forward to working with all of you and to not holding the mic much in the future. I'll just be sitting in the front row.
Any questions or other comments on this while John is up here? Last call. All right, thank you, Jonna. So I have alluded to on several occasions my sense of hearing different stories and different perspectives going forward. And there's always this threshold issue that comes up in public policy problems, and that is, what is the question? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And when that isn't clear and agreed to, it's almost impossible to come up with collaborative-based recommendations because people are solving different problems. So the mediator trick or tool, I'll explain the trick in hopes that you'll see it as a tool, is as a version of the cross the line exercise. And it's called the umbrella question. So what does it look like? It is simply a fill in the blank sentence. How can we address some of the interests that have been articulated in all of the interviews we've conducted, while at the same time addressing other interests? Some of those interests may be in conflict with the issues in the first part of the sentence, thereby satisfying our what we have in common. So, superimposing this on the overlapping icebergs, we can talk about positions, and we will, and we should hear the arguments in support of them. And if we do that, we have a chance of getting a settlement where everyone walks away somewhat equally unhappy. If we find out what's below those positions, what's really motivating folks, what do they care about, what are their hopes and dreams, and focus on what we have in common, that is a way, not the only way, a way to get this work group moving in the right direction. How is this technique used in this context? A, I explain it to you. B, I'm going to give you an example of it that the facilitation team crafted based on what we heard, which clearly is subject to being refined if we didn't get it right. And more importantly, this needs to be your umbrella question, not the city's, not mine. In a few minutes, you're going to talk about the technical or the legal, small l, scope or the charge for this committee. I want you to keep this thought in mind as we go and talk about the scope. So as we went around interviewing you, we were listening for your positions, we were listening for your arguments, and we were translating them into what are the motivations, the core issues that need to be solved. It's beyond the you cross the line, no, you cross the line. It's what are really the motivations that's going forward. Please know that what you are about to see is simply a draft. You're going to get homework later on at the end of this meeting where you are going to have the opportunity to edit this document any way you want. We will gather up all of your comments, produce new drafts, and at our January 30th meeting, there is going to be an exercise where you create this umbrella question for you. So there's no pride of authorship in this. If you like it, I wrote it. If you don't, Devin wrote it. Okay. No, that's not right. All right. So what is it? How can we collaboratively create a cost-effective, economically viable set of voluntary financial, technical, and support resources scaled to need to retrofit commercial and nonprofit URM buildings, while at the same time reducing life safety risks, avoiding displacement, and maintaining the architectural character of the communities, thereby satisfying our shared desire for an equitable, multifaceted, resilient community before, during, and after an earthquake. Stylistically, this draft question is everyone crossing the line simultaneously to the other side. It's not an either or proposition. It is and, not but. So, this is a very first cut. What I'm going to take some preliminary thoughts about it, and let me just take them now. So you're going to have to please do the microphone shuffle there, and I'm going to ask just for general comments on this. We're not going to edit it today. We're not going to finalize it today. It's really part of your homework, but it's to introduce the concept. So, Carolina.
When I started reading this, I really disliked that the first things we are talking is cost-effective and economically viable. Those terms for me should not be the beginning of the sentences. I think that how can we look on reducing life safety risks, avoiding displacements, while we work on the cost and the things that have no cost that we can do for the people? So it is not about the money. It is about all the other things that we can do that have low to no cost to be able to be safe, to be able to have a shared desire for equity. And I mean, there's a lot of things that we can do. And I really dislike that cost effective and economic are the first sentences of this conversation.
And that's a great example of, for some folks, there's a hierarchical priority. So sentences that are said, things that are said first have this preference and are relied upon first. For other people, it's things that are said last. Interesting. There's these two concepts called primacy and recency. People wait and remember what they hear first in a conversation and what they hear last. So that kind of topic is perfectly acceptable and encouraging to go in, and when we have this meeting next month in your homework, to have those kinds of, because that's important. It's about prioritization, I'm hearing you say. Is that accurate? Okay, thank you. So, any other comments from any member? Vic? And you have to use the microphone so they can hear. I can hear you okay, but.
I totally support what Carolina is saying. I want to add to that. And I don't think that we as a committee, are focusing on retrofitting commercial and nonprofit URM buildings. I think we as a committee are talking about earthquake preparedness, of which that is a part of. So I feel that this is very narrow. As Carolina was saying, there are a large number of no-cost opportunities, which will make us better prepared for earthquake preparation.
I'd second that, actually. I don't think cost-effective and economically viable words are necessary. If you just take those out, it's collaboratively create a viable set. So I'm with you.
And I agree too. That has always been the problem. There's money and dollars, and they want to limit it. I think if the city is really concerned about safety and earthquake, there's monies available at the state level, federal level to help individuals. So taking that part out, I agree.
Last call. Again, this is just preliminary, taking your pulse kind of thing. Yeah. Okay.
Not to get an argument, but to argue the other side, I guess the concern is if we don't look at retrofits that are less costly, they might be so costly that people wouldn't be able to afford them. So I guess for me, it's less about focusing on the money aspect, but I guess focusing on retrofits that are the best bang for the buck, so that they're more accessible to more communities, if I'm making myself clear.
I'm passing the mic here. So I'm looking at this in a slightly different way. I see your statement is the goal and probably needs to be amplified. And the statement up there, number one, is how can you get to the goal? It's wonderful to have laudatory goals and goals that people can agree on here. And then you have to find a pathway to get there. So I don't think these are mutually exclusive.
I'm focusing on the cost effective based on how I'm seeing it. Cost effective can be in terms of safety. There's a cost to how, when something happens, how much it costs. So for me, I'm not seeing it just based on retrofitting the buildings, but what happened when buildings or disaster happens, how cost effective will it be for all of us? There is an economic value attached to lives, even though we might not be focusing on that, but how cost effective can it be by how many lives you reduce? That is how I'm understanding it, not like helping building owners or cities to manage the way they can retrofit their buildings.
Bart?
I just wanted to comment about the in the statement, it talks the need to retrofit commercial and nonprofit URM buildings. And I don't know how I feel about this myself, and maybe some of you already have ideas, but the separation of commercial and nonprofit, which is between purple and red, as we sit here. And I think that just needs some thought too as we move along.
Thanks. Last call. Peter and then David.
Yeah, I would agree. If it's a life safety issue, it's a life safety issue. So there shouldn't be a distinction.
I think I've got one here. I think we have to have something in there about finances and economically viable. I'm not sure how to word it necessarily, but the money part can't be ignored as we deal with all of this. What I'm hearing is that that's not a factor at all. Well, it is a factor. I think we have to address it at some level, whether, we are going to be talking about hopefully having some resources available at the state or federal level or whatever. But the financial part is a big reason that the wheels came off of all of this in the first place. And so it has to be dealt with and considered and part of, and maybe not the priority statement, I certainly agree with that, but it has to be in the mix somewhere where it's a consideration, because nothing's free. And this is going to be potentially depending on what standards are eventually landed on, it can be a very, very expensive process. So we have to consider that. It has to be in the statement at some level.
All right. So thank you for those, again, preliminary comments. That's appreciated. But think about the tenor and quality of what we just experienced in the room. It was an exploration more than a debate. And that's the tenor and tone that will serve us well over the course of the process. So specifically, your homework is your suggested edits. So I'm leading with what is important to you, each of you, and the interest groups you represent. What are your underlying interests? Now you have an example of what interests mean versus positions and arguments. What are your shared goals? Okay, we will bundle all, and you'll get an email at in the next couple of days. It's going to give you all your homework and these instructions, so you don't need to be writing it down or unless you want to. But we'll bundle all those up, share the various views, and we're going to spend a major component on January 30th having y'all make this your own, and having these conversations, you can start to see the subtle differences that are extremely important to making this work. And like I said, we'll finalize at the next meeting. All right, so next topic, and I just wanted to check in, Jonna and Miriam and Alex, what is the situation on the arrival of dinner? You can't just tell me from there. I mean,
it's complicated. People have needs. Dinner's not complicated. It's spaghetti, more or less. It's pasta. It's been delivered. It's in the back. I ordered enough for the committee. Plus, I figured everyone on the committee would bring a friend. So 50 people about, more or less. I'm hoping that'll be enough for folks who want to eat. But I would just say, since we're holding the committee hostage, let's let them eat first. The stuff is labeled, but the last pasta is gluten-free, dairy-free, and vegetarian, because I know there's at least one person here that will want that. So when we go, can we just let the committee go first, the special foods at the end, and then everyone can help themselves? And I see I already broke into my cookies, but I'll put those out too.
All right. Will the committee member that is eating dessert before the meal please self-identify? All right. So we're just a little behind, but that's fine. It's better to do it right. As Jonna said, the facilitators eat first, then the work group, and then members of the public. So really, seriously though, work group first, and please try to get back here by my watch, so I can cheat, at 5:35. So that should be 10 minutes by this watch, 5:35. And then just to make your dinner so much more enjoyable, I'll be talking while you're eating. So on your mark, get set, manja, get in line and go for it. Since we're having Italian food, it's manja. Okay, stop these side conversations, this bonding, getting to know each other stuff. We don't have any time in the agenda for that. Let's get right to it. All right, so here is the companion conversation to the umbrella question technique. And that is to look at the resolution and the bylaws. So I'm going to call your attention to this slide while I get on my glasses. And I'm going to sit for this because I want to make sure I nail some of these words, but they are on the screen. So I'm providing this information so everyone hears it. I hope it's becoming clear that one of the goals for today's meeting is to get everyone on the same page, both around this table and in the audience, as to what are some of the expectations. Not that they can't change, but what are some of the expectations and what has the City Council said so far. So, Council resolution. Be it further resolved that both subgroups, this is the for-profit and nonprofit, shall evaluate reasonable seismic retrofit support, incentives, and voluntary program standards. I underlined the key words of that because words are important. I'm sorry, Devin.
Oh, and they have the entirety of the resolution and bylaws in the binder.
So for those of you who want to, proofread my work, in your binder, you actually have the actual resolution and the bylaws, so you can read along. We're just highlighting some of it for now. Thank you. And so clearly the most operative and important word in that sentence is voluntary. It does not say mandatory in that sentence. And I think everyone appreciates the history surrounding that and the litigation surrounding it. I just don't know what lawyer you could find anywhere that would get this done in the time frame we had. I bet he must, probably is Italian in some resort. Is there a Italian lawyer here that may have succeeded in doing this? Hey, John, good, congratulations. The Italian lawyer. All right, bylaws, purpose, and scope. So here is what we got from City Council. Recommendations to, quote, reduce the life safety risks posed by URM buildings and to reduce displacement following a seismic event. To look at financial and policy supports to promote seismic retrofits, recognizing the unique needs of commercial and nonprofit building owners, and standards for participation in voluntary support programs. Again, voluntary. Goes on to say it is not required or expected that the work group will recommend mandatory retrofits. It is expected that support for voluntary retrofits will be scaled to need. So, going back to the umbrella question, the draft purposely included some of that verbiage in it to be consistent with the scope. Because I have had the opportunity to talk with many of you in interviews and offline between interviews, for instance, I think Vic mentioned earlier about more of this charge or scope is too narrow. We should focus more on resiliency as opposed to fixing URM buildings. Not by way of argument, but just by way of transparent clarity. This City Council approved charge, it was unanimous, 4-0, talked about life safety risks posed by URM buildings. It did not talk about resiliency per se. We will have an opportunity in a few minutes after I go through the other words on the piece of paper for you to comment on that. And then also it'll be part of your homework to the extent you want to bring it up. So why do we have bylaws? Bylaws are considered a best practice for any public policy work group. It's basically designed to have clearly defined expectations as to what our task is and how we're going to go about performing that task. URM building means unreinforced building, to state the obvious, but as I like to say, it goes without saying, but bears repeating. That's what URM building means. Commercial building, under the definition, are all for-profit buildings except for single-family homes and duplexes. Nonprofit buildings are a building owned by an organization registered as a nonprofit entity with the Secretary of State. It does not include government-owned buildings. So I want to make it clear, a nonprofit building under the current statutory definitions does not include government-owned buildings. Pippa, and the microphone assistant, please. Oh, sorry, we found it.
That brings up a good question. I don't see government-owned buildings in our scope of work as it's framed so far, so I'm just wondering where and or when the city is interested in doing their own buildings. I know they have about 70 URMs under city ownership. So where does that come in?
Thank you. Yes, the city owns about 70 URMs, which include the ones, I'll be candid, that concern me most, which are community centers. I think 3 of our community centers are unreinforced masonry buildings, also the historic Kenton Firehouse, which is a community meeting space. We also own other buildings, an old Carnegie Library that's now an office, the Keller Auditorium, which is we could have a whole committee just to try and figure out what to do with that. And the number's so high because it's also a lot of park restrooms and picnic shelters. The city of Portland has a commission system of government, so each of those buildings belongs to a bureau, and that bureau belongs to a commissioner. And commissioners have had different priorities for retrofitting over time, and depending on who it is. The city's made good progress in retrofitting some parks buildings, but parks is financially really strapped right now, as many of you have probably seen, and so they don't have any immediate plans for additional retrofits right now. They did fund the retrofit of the Mount Scott Community Center in the last year, and when we had some budget for that. So that's one community center that should come off the list. For parks, I also think a lot of their restrooms and picnic shelters it doesn't make sense to retrofit them. So it's more likely when the park is kind of refreshed or whatever, renovated, that they'll demo those buildings and replace them with restrooms that are also ADA accessible and easier to clean. Let's see. So basically it's a slow process, and it's sort of incremental by bureau, and it's a slow process. It's incremental by bureau, and it depends on the availability of capital funding to do the projects.
Oh, sorry. Just because I remember Amanda Fritz saying that the city wouldn't recommend for private citizens to do anything the city wasn't willing to do itself.
She has been consistent in that and saying she wouldn't require people to do anything that she couldn't do, and she was the parks commissioner, so she saw the problem, I think, more firmly than everyone. Yeah.
All right. So let's go on to a little bit. What's the city's role? As you can see, as modeled today, the city is their staff. They provide staff to assist with technical support, substantive expertise, logistical assistance, administrative assistance, and advice to the work group. You're going to see when we get to the work plan portion of this that we're going to agree on what tasks, what topics we need to do, and who should present. It is not the default mode that the city is going to present on all of these topics. There's some things that perhaps they're in the best position to do, and there's some things where perhaps they're not in the best position to do. We also have, as John indicated, there's budget so we can bring in outside experts. We have members on the committee who have expertise, and you're more than willing to help educate the work group and the committee members. How are we going to vote? So one of the processes that the city bylaws contemplate is colloquially called consensus voting. And what does that mean? So you have in front of you these 3 cards, green, yellow, and red. Green, yellow, and red. 1, 2, or 3. So how this works is I facilitate the group. If I sense there's an emerging consensus, I call the question to test it. So for instance, I might say, it appears that the work group is coming close to a consensus that this is the best facilitation process they have been involved in. This would be, of course, totally hypothetical, okay? And if you agreed 100% with that statement, you would put the green 1 in your little in your little stand here, and then we'll call the roll, so you don't have to keep holding these things up. You have them in the little stand to do that, and then we would figure out the ones. You would vote 2, which is the yellow card. See the stoplight analogy? This is just cutting edge stuff. It's caution. I'd like to amend that proposal in some way. It would be, yes, Sam is doing a great job facilitating, given that we had a little choice to hire someone competent. You know, so I would vote a 2 on that. Okay, and then if you vote a 3, it means you absolutely disagree with the proposal. A consensus is when everyone votes 1 or 2. So if every member votes 1 and 2, we have a consensus. If anyone votes 3, we have a majority-minority report. Both reports go unvarnished to City Council through our office. How do I manage this going forward? So you all vote using your various cards. I would first ask the people who voted a 2, the yellow, what is it that you would like to suggest to the work group to amend the emerging consensus, that if your colleagues, now I don't know if Thomas, if this is you or Jennifer, are you trying to signal something to me with your red card moving forward? I mean, it's a little early. I mean, yeah, can you give me like maybe another 10 minutes or something? And so I'll say, okay, I see, Thomas, you voted yellow. What could we do? What would your colleagues have to do to change that proposal that if they agreed, you would in good faith would change your vote from a 2 to a 1? Oftentimes I find that kind of quote unquote friendly amendment successful, because oftentimes the person who made that suggestion to change is really clarifying someone else thought or saw it as a friendly amendment. Then I will ask the people that voted a 3, what is it about that proposal that if amended, you would at least in good faith be willing to vote a 2? And this is kind of an iterative process. I do this because if I simply ask, all in favor say aye, all opposed say no, we're debating again. We are not exploring, and we lose out by the sort of the rigid Robert's Rule of Order kind of facilitation. We lose out on creativity. So instead of using Robert's Rules of Order, I use something more informal. I call them Bob's Rules of Order. Okay, John. Oh, yeah.
My wife would tell you that I'm always slow, so I'd like to go back to the definition of terms. It may seem simple. The URM, unreinforced masonry building, is much too simple a term. And for example, a number of us have been working on the Keller Auditorium, and with our own money, and just discovering a lot about the building. There's a lot to learn about some examples of buildings that would expand people's understanding about masonry buildings. So I hope there'll be room for examples that will illuminate a lot of this.
The short answer is yes. That definition there is simply to explain what the acronym is. It's not to make a engineering or legal conclusion on what it was. I can do that, but that costs extra if you want me to do something in Latin. So if everyone votes 1 or 2, we got a consensus. If anyone votes a 3, we have 2 reports going out. And if it's a tie, in other words, we have an equal number of people that vote 3 and vote 1 and 2, both go forward to the city council as is. Officers and subcommittees, we have 2 subcommittees. Oh, yes, sir? Okay.
27 people
Yep.
13 and 14?
Yeah.
Which one is the 13? Which one's the 14?
Miriam, do you know off the top of your head which one has the higher number? For-profit has 14. Okay.
So nonprofit will not be submitting both, is that right? Or both reports, minority and majority?
Okay, so this is an evolving consideration. So thinking out loud only and trying to be as transparently responsive as I can. Technically, there are two subcommittees. Each subcommittee can produce its own report with majority and minority findings. Okay, so there's possibility of 4 reports. Okay? There is also a possibility that a lot of the issues in this process, it's not a division between for-profit and nonprofit. They are recommendations that both committees, all 27 people, can gather around and support, and they can stand on their own. So that part has not been figured out, and we're going to talk to you more about that, but that is the current thinking.
So we will be producing at most 4 reports to council, at minimum 1.
Correct. Okay. All right. I'll try to speed up here so you can get a real lawyer to come up and talk to you about public official laws. So we have 2 committees. Each subcommittee can appoint a chair and a co-chair. Each subcommittee can appoint a chair and co-chair. We are going to ask for self-nominations or nominations in your homework. At the next meeting, we will come up with a process where each committee decides on their chair and co-chair. Their role and job, in addition to the normal functions, includes the ability / we hope you will desire to join what we call the steering committee, which is the facilitation team plus the bureau folks that are in charge of this work and the chair and co-chair, at least once a month, to discuss what happened at the last meeting, what worked and didn't work, and what should we do for the next meeting. You know, if we have to push an agenda item forward or back, or who the speaker should be, or how do we frame the issue. You know, this is designed specifically to talk with you, not at you. And this is part of the design of the process. Yes, sir.
I'm just rubbing my eye.
Okay, then put your damn tent down. He said lovingly. All right. So you help with agendas, what have you. Facilitator's role. I see the facilitation team's client as the URM process. My client is not the city of Portland. My client is not each of you as individuals or as an entity. My loyalties, as laid out in my personal services contract, which is available for anyone to review, is to the process, to ensure that we are impartial, that we are setting a collaborative tone, identifying a work plan so we know what work needs to be done and how to do it, and move forward. My personal services contract and the bylaws say that I am not to be influenced by payment source. Okay? And you know, you can, but it would have to be offline, Pastor. I mean, you know, I've already got one member offering me cookies, which I did not say no to. I'm just saying. And my status as facilitator cannot be changed by the city without consulting all of you first on that decision. So you are 27 of my most favorite people. Okay? Commitments to community. A lot of these fall under common sense, but we'll remind you as we go on through the meetings, but it's really important to speak respectfully, briefly, and not repetitively. Allow people to say what's true for them without reprisal. Generate and explore options on the merits. Understand other work group members. Consult regularly with your interest groups. Work towards fair, practical solutions. Accurately summarizing our work when you're not in the room and presenting a full, fair, and balanced view. Not attempting to affect a different outcome outside the work group once the work group has reached consensus. So let me be very transparent about what that says. It means you all vote 1 or 2 and support it. And then we find out in the newspaper, all of us find out in the newspaper that you're quoted as saying that proposition that was voted on Tuesday night is bogus. That's going to be a process foul. If you're opposed to a proposal, Godspeed, talk to us in the room and we'll work it out. But if we start going on doing things outside this room that are different, it's going to break down any sense of trust and respect. Communications, transparency is essential. Work members are required, and you'll hear a little bit about this in the training, to notify the city staff liaison, which is Jonna, of written communications on behalf of the URM committee with lobbyists or the media. This is not something the city is saying, we want to micromanage what you are doing. Franco, the city attorney, will explain the public records issues inherent in this. Peter.
Going back to speaking respectfully and things like that, one thing that comes to mind is in the last committee when I was observing, maybe 10 people were on their laptops and iPads the entire time. And we're all committing an extraordinary amount of time here. So if there could just be some consideration to that, I think that would be productive.
Okay. So Devin can go around looking if people are playing solitaire on Facebook and
No, I want her to close hers.
Close hers.
Yeah.
Oh, that's what was distracting you. She was playing that. No, that's a valid idea. All right. To self-regulate. I mean, I promise to get you, Anthony. To self-regulate. I'm not the principal of this organization. I'm not here to put people in timeout, but I will. But help moderate your teammates and yourself. If someone is acting in consistency with the collaborative node, help them and help me and help us help each other with this process. Again, it's an exploration. Anthony.
My question is actually for the next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. So members should direct public testimony about the committee work to the website. That will ensure staff and I get it. All those comments are going to be rolled up and sent to all of you. So if you have comments, members of the public have comments, they can go to that website that email address, send them in. They'll all just be copied, put in a PDF, sent out to the work group and available for comment. And individual members should not speak on behalf of the entire work group. Anthony. Was this the slide or one more?
This was the one.
Okay.
So 2 questions. First of all, what does it mean to speak on behalf of the URM committee? Second, how are lobbyists defined here? And specifically, I'm asking because Portland Tenants United is all volunteer, but it is also a registered lobbying entity with the city of Portland. So would any Portland Tenants United volunteer who gives testimony at city council and meets with city council members be considered a lobbyist?
So I'm going to defer both those questions to the lawyer, except for the speak on behalf of. And I believe, subject to him correcting me, that means you go out into a public forum and say, on behalf of the URM building, City of Portland URM building work group, we think this or we think that. It's in that because
Opposed to our own individual opinions.
yeah, you're totally free to, and we just ask that you utter your own opinions here too, because that's where we have an opportunity to do work. So we had conversations about what all these words mean. There is a provision in the bylaws to amend the bylaws, which includes the scope. It says the body, meaning this work group, may vote to recommend to Commissioner Joanna Hardesty amendments or repeal of these bylaws. The Bureau may also recommend changes to her. Commissioner Hardesty must sign off on the original bylaws, which she has done, and amendments to the bylaws. Members have no authority to amend the bylaws without that approval. Meaning, if all of you voted today to say X, the bylaws should change to X, we don't have the ability to do that. What the city and I would do is bundle that up, decide if it goes into a resolution or ordinance, notice it for the hearing before City Council, and you guys would go before City Council and make your case. So, that being said, I know we're running close on time, but I guess I am asking, I know people have some concerns about the scope. One scope idea I heard is to broaden it to include resiliency in general versus in the narrow that it is now. Does anyone else have any quick list? We're not going to argue them. We're not going to debate them. Is there any other suggestion? Yes, Pippa.
Including city buildings.
Include city buildings in the analysis. Will be one. Any last ones? Yes, sir. Abe.
When I think of government buildings, in my mind, it's city buildings, but educational systems are also part of government. So do you want to include those two? I'm just yes.
Portland Public Schools is a separate legal entity that owns those schools, as I understand it. All right. Again, send us your homework if you have it, but this is what the City Council has said, and that's inviolate absent a really compelling reason. All right. Next up on your agenda is the public official training and disclosures. We have Franco Luchin here. He's a senior deputy city attorney. Pardon me? That goes without saying, but bears repeating. It's redundant. I mean, of course. And so, Franco, do the Rose Festival wave in the back, please, so we know who you are. Okay. He was so excited to give this presentation on public official training and disclosures that he had one of his colleagues do a video that is as part of the Office of Civic Life's requirements for work groups. You all have to take this training and then fill out some disclosure forms at each time a conflict of interest arises. So we'll show this particular video, and then there'll be a closed book test afterwards. But we grade on the curve.
Welcome to your training for service on an advisory board or commission, and thank you for filling this vital role for the city. This presentation serves as an introduction to your ethical obligations that attach by nature of your service.
Slide 1, Training for Advisory Board Volunteers, City of Portland.
I'm also going to talk about public meetings and public records. I am Tony Garcia, Deputy City Attorney, and this is a presentation I have created for city employees that work with boards and commissions and volunteers that serve on those boards and commissions. For the content in this presentation, you'll find that your Bureau liaison will be able to answer most of your questions. For any questions they cannot answer, they will contact my office for further advice. As you may realize by now, by serving on a board or commission, you are now a public official. And with that comes obligations as required by city, state, and local rules. You'll note that where appropriate, the citation for the applicable rule is referenced within the slide.
Slide 2, Public Official, ORS 244.020 and PCC 1.03.020. Volunteers on a board or commission are public officials and may not use their position for financial benefit. Relatives must also not benefit. Businesses you are associated with must also not benefit. Prohibition includes using confidential information for financial or personal gain. Prohibition includes most gifts. City officials ensure public trust by avoiding even the appearance of impropriety.
You'll find that most of the ethics rules are meant to prohibit financial gain by you, your relatives, and businesses you're associated with by virtue of your public service. I'll talk more about businesses you're associated with on the next slide. For now, I want to highlight that even sharing information could implicate the ethical rules. Note some prohibitions continue even after you are done serving on the board or commission. For example, ORS 244.040 subsection 5 prohibits a former public official from attempting to use confidential information for personal gain if that confidential information was obtained while holding the position as a public official. When the rules refer to relatives, it generally includes spouse, children, your spouse's children, siblings, in-laws, and other people who are close within a family tree. Please pay close attention that the definition includes someone for whom there's a legal support obligation or a person who provides benefits to that public official. For further clarification on who constitutes a relative, please refer to the statute. The idea here is that it is not just you, but also those people very close to you that should not benefit because of your public service. Now we will talk about business associations. The rule again is that businesses you are associated with cannot financially benefit by virtue of your public service, meaning your actions cannot directly benefit the business. For public corporations, think of entities trading through public stock. You cannot be a director, officer, or owner. For privately held businesses, these are businesses not traded on the stock exchange, including local businesses, the umbrella will be a bit larger in that you cannot be an employee or agent and make a decision that financially benefits the business without violating the ethical rules. The reason for this is the scope of the business associationship rule is to cover when you have a managing interest. So an employee within a publicly held corporation with thousands of employees may not have that management tie, whereas within a small business of just a few employees, it might exist. Here are the financial limits when the rules say interest or ownership: $1,000 in a private company and $100,000 in a publicly traded company. These numbers apply to the preceding 12 months of your service on the board.
Slide 3, Business Associations, ORS 244.020, Director, Officer, Owner, or Employee. Private only. Owned stock or interest. $1,000 for privately held business. $100,000 in publicly held business. Serving without pay with a nonprofit does not create a conflict.
As I already mentioned, the benefit is not just you, but any of those covered individuals from the prior slide. While I use the word relative, remember it is a bit broader than that. Certain public officials are required by Oregon law to file an annual verified statement of economic interest form. For the city, this is elected officials and Planning and Zoning Commission members. If you do file, it includes any business listed as a source of household income on that form when we talk about business associations. If you have an association with a nonprofit, even just as an employee, you should consider that the basis for a conflict and recuse yourself from participating in any decision that impacts that entity. If you're on the board of a nonprofit and not paid, you may still make a decision without violating the state ethical rules, but you should still consider whether the decision violates the city's rule prohibiting even the appearance of impropriety. The law recognizes two types of conflict of interest: potential and actual. The difference between an actual conflict of interest and a potential conflict of interest is determined by the words would and could. A public official is met with an actual conflict of interest when the public official participates in an action that would affect the financial interest of the official, their relative, or business they are associated with. A public official is met with a potential conflict of interest when the public official participates in an action that could affect the financial interest of the official, their relative, or business they are associated with.
Slide 4. Conflicts of Interest. ORS 244.020. Potential. Official must announce publicly the potential conflict prior to taking any action thereon in the capacity of a public official. Actual. Official must announce publicly the nature of the actual conflict and refrain from participating as a public official in any discussion or debate on the issue out of which the actual conflict arises, or from voting on the issue.
Most of you are on advisory bodies and are not making final decisions. Because you make a recommendation to another body, City Council for example, at most you only have a potential conflict of interest. Accordingly, with a potential conflict of interest, you need to declare the nature of the conflict, but may still participate. Administratively, the announcement needs to be made on each occasion when the public official is met with the conflict of interest and disclose the nature of that conflict. For example, a board member would have to make an announcement each time when met with the conflict of interest, but only one time in each meeting. If the matter giving rise to the conflict of interest is raised at another meeting, the announcement must be made again at that meeting. Some boards and commissions make final decisions and must be aware of the recusal requirement for actual conflicts of interest. Note that there are special rules for planning commission members. Gifts are something of economic value given to you, your relative, or household for no payment or payment at a discounted price. The opportunity for the gift is problematic because it is not available to members of the general public who are not public officials. The law allows a $50 exemption per year in limited circumstances. The Portland City Auditor guidance on the subject is that in general, personal gifts should be refused or returned with a friendly but firm message that city officials are not allowed to receive gifts. A personal gift such as lunch or entertainment based on your official position or from someone with a legislative administrative interest under $50 in value may be legal, but no amount is too small to be ethically questionable. Public officials who are authorized or had significant role in a contract may not have a direct beneficial financial interest in that contract for 2 years after leaving their public position. And certain items are going to be exempt from the definition of a gift. Remember, the gifts relate to your service as a public official and possibly what interest the individual has in your position with the city. If someone you don't know and wouldn't normally buy you lunch says, "Hey, I hear you're on a commission for the city, let me buy you lunch and talk to you about it," that would be prohibited. If they have an administrative or legislative interest with work you might do with the city, then for that reasoning, it would also be an unacceptable gift. Certainly, if there are meals, entertainment that you receive by nature of your position, such as being at a ceremonial event, those are not considered a gift. Also, something that might recognize your service, such as a keepsake following your service. While this is not an exhaustive list on the slide for all of the exclusions, the common ones that you are likely to come across are listed.
Slide 5. Gifts. ORS 244.020 may not accept gifts over $50 from anyone with a legislative or administrative interest in the public official's decision or vote. Applies even if there is a pre-existing relationship. Economic value includes cash, discount, entertainment, subsequent employment, certain meals, lodging, travel, and other tangible objects of value. Excluded are non-gifts, plaques, trophies, desk items unless valuable, admission, food or beverage at meeting, not private meals, payment by the city, lodging, travel, stipend, incidental entertainment.
For further information, please refer to the opinions of the Oregon Ethics Commission, including the guide it publishes. This and other references will be on the last slide. Public officials must know that they are held personally responsible for complying with the provisions of Oregon law. This means that each public official must make a personal judgment in deciding such matters as the use of official position for financial gain, what gifts are appropriate to accept, or when to disclose conflicts of interest. For political activity, the provisions in ORS Chapter 244 restrict some choices, decisions, or actions of a public official. The restrictions placed on public officials are different than those placed on private citizens. You may not engage in political activity using city resources. City property, time, staff are included within this definition. Certainly you can express your political views on your own time, your own listserv, or social media, but you need to avoid associating it with the city.
Slide 6. Political activity, ORS 260.432 and Office of Government Relations, ADM-3.01. Personal. Express personal political views. Engage in political activities. City. No city resources, property, funds, staff, not on city time. All legislative and tribal affairs activities shall be conducted and managed through the city's Office of Government Relations.
If a public official fails to comply with the operative statutes, a violation cannot be dismissed by placing the blame on the city. Some of you may wear other hats and might testify on a subject to the state legislator. For example, the city's Office of Government Relations is responsible for managing and representing the state and federal legislative interests of the city. So before you casually mention that you are on a city board, make sure you are not implying that you are representing the city unless you have obtained the approval from OGR. When in doubt, it is always best to say you are expressing your own personal views and not that of the city or your particular board or commission. The Public Meeting Law applies to all meetings of a governing body, of a public body, for which a quorum is required in order to make a decision or deliberate towards a decision on any matter. We all know City Council is subject to the Oregon Public Meetings Law. For advisory bodies, because you make recommendations to City Council, your advisory body is also subject to the law. If an advisory body makes recommendations to an individual and that individual has authority to take action, then the advisory body is not subject to the Public Meetings Law.
Slide 7. Public meetings, ORS 192.610 to 192.630. Report to City Council or other group subject to Oregon Public Meetings Law. Required. Report to individual. Recommended. May not deliberate by more than a quorum outside of a public meetings. Quorum is a majority, if not provided otherwise in charter, bylaws, or other rules of order. ORS 174.130. Limited ability to have an executive session. Exclude the public.
Note that the individual has to have the authority to take action. If that individual is going to pass the recommendation to another governing body, then there is no exemption. So if you have a quorum together, you cannot discuss matters that would normally come before you unless you hold a properly noticed public meeting. So the next question is, what's a quorum? If not provided for in your bylaws, code, charter, or other source, it is a majority of members. You can also ask your bureau liaison. Social gatherings would of course fall outside the scope of the Public Meetings Law, because even if you have a quorum, a truly social event would not include you discussing the subjects your committee handles. Executive session is when you exclude the public from the meeting. There are limited purposes for an executive session, which include employment, employee discipline, labor and real estate negotiations, and consultation with legal counsel regarding current or potential litigation. If you feel an executive session may be appropriate, consult your Bureau liaison. On the right side of the slide, you will see the particular requirements in order to conduct a public meeting in accordance with the law. For most of you, staff will ensure these components are met. Voting. A public vote means just that. No secret ballots. Written ballots must designate the voting member. No proxy voting and no absentee voting. Control refers to having a presiding officer authorized to keep order at the meeting. For notice, it needs to be calculated to give actual notice to interested persons and states the time, place, and lists the principal subjects to be discussed. Special and emergency meetings have different requirements. There are minimum requirements for minutes, and these include who was present, the substance of discussion, and the results of any vote. You should have sound, video, written, or digital recordings of all meetings. These need not be verbatim, but must give a true reflection of the matters discussed at the meeting and the views of the participants. For location, it must be a place large enough to hold the anticipated attendance and must be in a place that does not discriminate based on the basis of race, color, creed, sexual orientation, sex, national origin, age, or disability. This means the site must also be one that people with disabilities can access. And finally, the public gets to attend. It's often perceived that the Public Meetings Law infers a right to participate, but it's not a participation law. However, it's in the public observance. Still, you should decide what the public's role should be. It is common to have public comment components so that members of the public can choose to attend, are able to have their voice heard. If you anticipate this will be burdensome, you may want to make requirements to ensure you have sufficient time to conduct your business. You could establish a sign-up list or place a time limit for each speaker. You may also want to consider whether public comment assists your committee's work. Finally, let's talk about public records. While there are exemptions in the law, the presumption is that we disclose all records.
Slide 8. Public records. Presumption of disclosure. Quote, every person has a right to inspect any public record of a public body in this state, except as otherwise provided. End quote. ORS 192.420, subsection 1. Writing means handwriting, printing, photography, and every means of recording, including letters, words, pictures, sounds, or symbols, or a combination thereof, and all papers, maps, files, facsimiles, or electronic recordings. End quote. ORS 192.420, subsection 6. Email or drafts. Public records may include an email or text message if it discusses the city's business, whether the record is located on city network or equipment or on personal electronic devices. Drafts are also public records. Criminal repercussions. Knowingly destroying public records can constitute a criminal offense. ORS 162.305.
Public record is a broad category. It includes handwriting, printing, photographing, and every means of recording, including letters, words, pictures, sounds, or symbols, or any combination thereof, and all papers, maps, files, faxes, electronic recordings, or social media. Social media is outside the scope of this presentation, so if your board is using one, please make sure your Bureau liaison is aware of the rules and advising you appropriately. Whether an email or document contains information relating to the conduct of the public's business is case-specific. Generally, if an email or document discusses procedural or substantive aspects of your work, it will meet this test. A personal email does not become a public record simply because it is sent by a public official. Whether the email or document is prepared, owned, used, or retained by a public body is also fact-dependent. A document not in the possession of the government still can be a public record by virtue of being used or prepared by a public body. Your drafts are included in this definition. Email exchanges about the committee's business with other committee members are public records, and it could constitute a public meeting that should be open under the law. You should discuss this with your bureau liaison and colleagues on your committee to have a plan in place about how the committee or board will conduct its work and where public records will be retained in accordance with the proper retention schedule. Please be mindful that I'm talking about using the reply all function on emails. Lastly, I would be remiss without mentioning that knowingly destroying a public record can be punished criminally. Here are some additional resources you may want to consult for further guidance on the topics included in this presentation.
Slide 9. Additional resources. City of Portland Code, Chapter 1.03, Oregon Government Ethics Commission, Oregon Revised Statutes, Chapter 244, Oregon Administrative Rules, Chapter 199, City of Portland Bureau of Human Resources, Administrative Rules, Oregon Attorney General's Public Records, and Meetings Manual.
Thank you for your time today. I hope you feel more informed about ethics, public meetings, and public records law.
All right. You know, I don't know if all of you have completed your holiday shopping, but I can get these DVDs for you to give to your family and friends at a appropriately discounted rate. All right. So we've got about 5 minutes for questions. Franco, why don't you come on up, introduce yourself. If you were a building, what kind of building would you be? And then I'll call on people for answers to questions.
Hi, I'm Franco Luchin from the City Attorney's Office, and thank you for watching that training. That is actually one that is provided to all city commissions and boards. It's not. I know you know Sam was kidding because it was hilarious, but it was not created just for this board.
So, questions as to any of that form. You have in your handout the disclosure form, and we're not going to ask you to fill that out today. You'll have the opportunity to fill that out and send it in. This will be part of your homework, but this is an opportunity to ask any questions. Pastor Tate? No quid pro quo. Okay. Pastor Tate, sorry, but apparently you did not read the bylaws, where it clearly states, I do the drugs. All right. Anthony.
I don't know if you remember my question earlier.
I didn't catch that. I know it had to do with lobbyists.
I'll repeat it really briefly. First of all, thank you to everyone who was involved in putting together this presentation. So my question was about talking with lobbyists, right? Work group members being required to notify city staff liaison about written communications with lobbyists. So I'm in Portland Tenants United, which is an all-volunteer organization, but it is registered with the city of Portland as a lobbying entity. So if I'm having written communications with other volunteers at Portland Tenants United, would that be considered, specifically members of Portland Tenants United who have meetings with city officials to discuss political issues, would that be considered communication with lobbyists?
And pardon me, it's been a while since since the council meeting where they passed the resolution forming this committee, but was your status as a lobbyist or your status with Portland Tenants United disclosed prior to your appointment to this committee? Let me get back to you on that. I don't have an immediate concern with it, but let me just double check, and I'll get back to you shortly, like the next couple of days.
Anyone else? Questions? Yes, Kathy.
So at the beginning, you kind of made the comment that everybody here on the committee has some conflict of interest to some extent because we have a vested interest in something. So I think when the hands went up around the room of people that own a URM building, there were 9 of us. Is that considered a conflict of interest that needs to be disclosed, or is that sort of a given?
There's a potential conflict of interest depending on what the decision is that you're participating in. If it could result in pecuniary benefit or avoiding some sort of economic detriment, then it would be a potential conflict. If there's some sort of connection, that it's going to result in an economic benefit or, again, avoid a detriment, or one of your relatives or business you're associated with, then it'd be an actual conflict.
Well, I guess I would need some direction because the whole entire purpose of this committee is to discuss URM buildings, and there's 9 of us here that own one. So and then there's condominium owners and churches who are in URM. So I'm unclear as to how we're supposed to fill out the form.
I think you would disclose your ownership in.
Just say we're a URM building owner.
Yeah, I mean,
right. Or that we own a
can't-
building that's
we
on the
can't
list.
If a conflict arises, we can't cure it, but
Okay.
transparency is the goal.
Okay.
Dave?
So I was going to say that I disclose that I'm a a structural engineer, and that's a potential conflict of interest, because I could benefit financially from doing design work for retrofits.
Okay, and that's great. And to the extent, I mean, that you've disclosed is great. To the extent that there's a decision being made that you think could affect your bottom line, just for shorthand, then I think you'd want to make a disclosure at that meeting again. Something else Sam and I had talked about was having a binder available with the disclosure forms, everyone's disclosure forms in it. Keep in mind you can update them as things, should things change. But that way, if anyone on the committee wants to refresh themselves on who has what interest, that information's there.
In addition to filling out the form, you would need to affirmatively state it at the decision point?
Well, we were talking about sort of a practical workaround for that being having a written record of it available for anybody to look at. I think the best practice would be to state it.
So we're going to have to deal with this. Here is my half-formed or malformed idea that I'm running up the flagpoles. We have a binder. Everyone has done their forms in it. It will be available at the front table. It'll be available for the public to see. At the beginning of every meeting, I'm going to say, I have in this binder, which you've all reviewed, your public disclosure forms. Are these your current disclosures? Everyone's saying aye, say aye. If anyone has any amendments, what are your amendments? Thank you. Next agenda item. Did you hear that in the notes, Devin? Great idea. And we'll see if it's a legal idea in a minute.
And these are self-disclosures, right? So we're not obviously policing each other. This is everybody's responsibility to disclose what their interest is.
Okay, last call on questions surrounding this. Andrew.
If we filled out the disclosure for other commissions that we're involved with, do we need to do it again?
Yes.
The answer is yes, and some of you, I love you more than life itself, but some of you filled them out and didn't sign them. And so, we're going to ask that everyone fill them out and sign them so that doesn't get lost in the shuffle. All right, thank you very much.
Can I just...
You do it mic drop and walk out and maybe sign that DVD for your colleague would be really fantastic. All right. Let me see what's going on here. So we go through all those slides that you have in your packet, and I'm going to hurry through some things so we have time for public comment. All right. The next slide is the draft work plan. Well, what's a work plan? By the end of the next meeting, we'll have a scope dealt with and talked about. We'll have an umbrella question talked about. And inherent in that, or a layer below it in the hierarchy, are what are the questions that we need to address? What are the facts we need to gather? And in what order should those take place? It is a draft, as before, for you to comment on. And I'll give you some specific instructions in the minute. Think of it this way. A year from now, we've got the greatest full consensus report in the history of civilization, okay? And you turn to the table of contents and you look at the section headers in the table of contents. They could look something like this, that we're going to do this in the following phases. Phase one, we're going to set the table. We're going to talk about all of the background, all of these reports, all of the documents. What do they mean? What don't they mean? More importantly, what should they mean? We'll explore the scope of our work as promised via the umbrella question and the work plan. At phase two, we'll ask ourselves, what are we trying to achieve? Again, I've mentioned several times, I want to emphasize it again. If we can't agree up front on the problem we're trying to solve, we're just spinning our wheels. Okay? So this exercise is a way to collectively think through what are the things we're trying to do. And so, for instance, what are we trying to achieve? What levels of URM retrofitting are we trying to achieve? What are the benefits? What are the burdens? What are the magnitude of scale costs? What are the current financial options? What are the reasonable costs to be covered? Step three, what support strategies? So part of our charge is not just look at financing options, but what are the support strategies? Is there one-stop shopping, like the Fred Meyer of URM permits that you can walk through? What do those look like? What are non-financial supports? Step four is what are the next steps in developing education and outreach programs for the options you recommend? Phase five, what are your final recommendations? Any other recommendations to City Council? It's just an idea of what a work plan could look like. By the end of the next meeting, I hope to work with you, have this completed, and like in your materials, there are sub-bullets under each of these items, A, B, C, D. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's deciding now what are the key issues. Now, once that's done, is it inviolate, subject to never changing? Of course not. It's an iterative, evolving process that as we move from meeting to meeting to meeting, we will see, does this work plan still viable? Is it still vibrant? Is it in the right order? That's all with intent. So, what will be your, oh my goodness, what happened there? So what's your homework? Again, you'll get this in the email. Are these the correct questions that you need answered in order to make recommendations to council? Add to them, subtract from them, edit them. Are the questions in the most logical order? Whom do you suggest speak on what topic? Like the umbrella question, we'll bundle your comments, give you a rolled up draft of everyone's things. A week before the meeting, you'll have time to think about them. We'll dive in and edit this work plan. And then the work group will discuss it and finalize it at the next meeting. One thing I want to suggest now, the city, as John has said, has resources to bring in outside experts. And from my old trial lawyer days, I want to define an expert for you. An expert is anyone that lives more than 100 miles away and charges more than $100 an hour. So we're willing to bring in experts as long as they are 99, 95. No. So in part of your homework, when you go through this work plan, there is a column that says, who do you recommend speak on this topic? We are not doing this kind of jamming the process through and saying, here are the experts. They are the weigh the truth and the light. You tell us who the experts are in the community that you think have sufficient bona fides. This could include you, members of the work group, that you are an expert on work group plan 3D to little a, little I. We want to hear that. And we want to hear that as quickly as possible. So that's your homework. Any quick questions about what a work plan is, why it's important, and how we choose to create it with you, not say, here it is. Did you have something, Abe?
I was actually going to ask about the time frame to get the whole process done.
So the question is, are there milestones and draft reports? This process suggests 4 phases, and there could be interim reports going out that are just progress reports on where we are at. But the city's bureaus and the commissioner's aides will be checking in and keeping up to date on where we are at in this process. Yes, Pastor.
I've heard a lot about the URM list of buildings. I've not seen one.
Mhm.
So is there a working list? Is it at, I know during one presentation, someone said that some work had been done to one, so one of the buildings may have come off the list. Are we going to be privy to having the list, and how exhaustive is it? And is it a working document that's going to be modified as we go along?
City? Jonna? Get the microphone, please.
Hi, sorry. The list right now is online. There's a searchable map and inventory information. So I'll send out a link when we send out notes. I'll send out a link to the inventory, and we'll get it on the website too, because that should be easy to find anytime if you're not scrolling through the email. So we'll make it available that way. And then I think probably someone else should say something about how you get on or off the list.
Well, let's save that topic for,
all right.
how you get on.
That might be a big topic.
I think it might go beyond the 3 hours left we have in this meeting. Pastor?
One of the questions that was asked way back is other cities. What did other cities do? Are there other models that other cities? What did they do? And I don't think I've ever. I think we've asked John. We've asked that way back. Do you remember when we asked that way back over at Vancouver Avenue? What did other cities do? And I don't think I've ever gotten.
And so the answer is there are other cities' works. Of course, Portland is unique and has different circumstances. But why not see what other folks have done? And yeah, and so part of the work plan will to give you that work and maybe even bring someone in to answer your questions to see what are the similarities and differences between Portland and whatever their city is. As Bureau Director Myers said, California has done this, and of course they have many more earthquakes and different types of earthquakes. So that's certainly learned from others from their past mistakes. All right, this is the public comment period. Do I have the list of folks that have signed up? While I'm looking at that, we're going to ask you to, anyone that wants to make a public comment, come to this chair here. You get free water, Hershey Kisses, and apparently lifesavers. And I need to know how many we have so I can allocate the time per person. Okay, so I have 5 yes and 2 maybe. Are these in the order they signed up? Okay, we don't know. So I'll do that by the people I like best first. I don't know anyone, so I guess I'm going to ask you to give us 2 minutes each, knowing that you'll have more opportunity at the next meeting. You can do written comments. There's forms there, and we will send them up. So I'm going to see about the maybes first. Claire Carter, C-A-R-D-E-R, Claire Carter. That maybe turned into no. Tim Evan. You want to come up, Tim? And the mic, are you going to give Tim the microphone? So the usual drill is you introduce yourself and tell us what you want us to hear.
Just that my name's Tim Even, a building owner and from Southeast Portland. And I just hope going forward that this all sounds much better than the last process. And I want you to continue with transparency and all work together and realize that this list isn't the most accurate, and also that the other vulnerable buildings should be considered with all of that, because it's not just one type of building that could be the problem. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
And I apologize for mispronouncing your last name. I actually know your wife. Don't take that the wrong way. And I'm sorry, I'm not good with names. Is it Tanya Sorrell Neal? Come on down, right over there.
Hi, my name is Tanya Neal. I am the West Region Director for the International Masonry Institute, and we have a vested interest in participating and engaging and providing you guys with expertise and resources as you go through this process. I personally have been engaged with the Seattle's URM committee since 2010. I get longevity awards for that, as well as the San Francisco URM ordinances that they have in place. And so we have a variety of experience and expertise that we hope to be able to provide to you guys as you go through this. In addition to what I do from this type of setting, we have experts in historic preservation, historic restoration, as well as unreinforced masonry regarding materials, property and performance of the materials, identity and recognize URM problems, and things like Bolts Plus, being able to explain the difference between Bolts Plus and a restoration and a URM, and condition assessments. And so we can meet that $9.95 value of an expert by providing one of our historic preservationists or our URM experts. So I just wanted to let you also know that we provide assistance in when you guys get to the process of writing the ordinances and getting to that next step, providing that quality assurance so the business owner or the building owner doesn't get stuck in a situation where they have an unqualified restoration specialist working on their project. So we have certifications where we train here locally in Portland on historic preservation and URM at our training center out by the airport. And so we have certification language that we can offer. We do offer to spec writers, architects and engineers. And so just wanted to let you know that we are here to help. We have no financial vested interest whatsoever. We are a nonprofit funded by the masonry industry. And so if there's anything at all we can do, provide presentations on a number of different things, please let me know.
Thank you. Jim Atwood? Jim Atwood? Okay. I can't read this. It looks to be K-U-I-R. K-U-I-R. N-G-N-U-U-M. Does that ring any bells? Okay, Bill Eastman? Bill Eastman? Come on down. There's a recent study that indicates men with facial hair have superior intelligence and sex appeal. What do you think about that?
You better reread that article. I'm proof of the opposite. I don't have anything prepared to say. I didn't expect to speak, but I can't turn down 2 minutes. Money does matter. It matters a lot. Engineering's too expensive. Permits are too expensive. The steel cross bracing is too expensive. All this stuff makes old-fashioned engineering solutions cost prohibitive. There has to be some solution that modern technology can solve. And there are a number of ways of reinforcing buildings that don't require that and that are being used in other cities. I'd like to see some way that they could be adapted in Portland. Bring the cost way down, more people do it, safety goes up. Seems pretty simple to me. And I want to, Mr. Eves, I want to just back him up on. I'm cautiously optimistic, listening tonight, and I'd like to think that the transparency and the collaboration goes all the way through the fabric and isn't just on the surface. That we really get a solution where everybody buys into it, or at least everybody feels they lose the same or gain the same, right? And I guess that's about it. That's not even 2 minutes.
Hey, thanks.
Okay. Thanks.
Reno Josen? Reno Josen?
Reno Josen, I'm a general contractor. Good job so far, guys. Thank you. The only concerns I have, I've worked on 4 URM buildings in Multnomah County, and we've had 4 different sets of engineering, 4 different sets of rules. The drag structs aren't consistent. The pole tests aren't consistent. The bracing's not consistent. Get it consistent and look at the alternative methods, the FRP panels, the inside brace panels. They're a lot less expensive than the I-beams, the cross beams, and stuff like that. And it's all right to say that money's not important if it's not your money, but it is important. And the thing is, collectively, some of the smaller operations, from my experience in other cities and other countries, like my friend over there who I've tipped a few pints up there, get together with some other businesses and work together on them, because power in numbers, and that brings the community together and solves a lot of the problems. The churches, same thing. We got a lot of volunteers in this community. Let's take advantage of that and communicate, keep it transparent, and remember, there's always more than one solution to the problem, but don't confuse us contractors with 6 different options all at once. Give us 2 or 3 with drag struts, because it gets confusing, every inspector. And you should consider the tri-counties too, because this is not just an issue in Portland. Okay, we've got 2 other counties that we're all dealing with that have the same problems, and if you collectively got together with them, we'd solve the problem and maybe defray the costs to more than just one county. Thank you.
Thank you. And where did you spend earlier today, buddy?
Oh, I was jury duty the last 2 days.
Yeah.
Sorry I was late.
No problem. There you go. All right. Please, members of the audience and certainly members of the work group, my phone number's there on the screen. The email that you've received has my email address. We'll send out your homework. Just pick up the phone, call, email, send up a flare, and whatever it takes to go forward. John, did you have something?
Yeah, 2 questions. Mr. Eves mentioned that other buildings should be included other than just URMs, and I think Pippa mentioned the same thing. I really endorse that idea. If we're looking at public safety, what do we care, whether people die in a concrete steel building or whatever? Now, and if that's true, does it require an amendment to the bylaws?
It may.
The other way to do it is to expand the definition of URM, but.
Okay.
And secondly, I noticed in the homework, there's the aspiration that we determine, quote, to what levels. And I really, really endorse that idea. There's only one building I know of in the city that is 100% safe.
Mm-hmm. Okay. David.
Just housekeeping stuff.
Please.
You mentioned the next meeting is January 30th.
Yes,
is that
sir.
correct? Will it be the same time of day, just so I can get it on my calendar? Or do we know yet?
We believe that is true. I'm not trying to be disparaging of staff who did their best to work the microphones, but we got to get that resolved and figure it out. So we also have a request out to folks. We want to hold these meetings out in the community. I never liked the processes where communities asked to come downtown as the sole source of doing it. And I believe Jonna has been in communication with Pastor Matt Hennessy, who's got a church that's a URM, and he's open. And you'll see part of your homework. If you're open to hosting us, and have facilities that are big enough and we can get microphones and record it, and show video, we want to come outwards, not say everyone come on downtown, because it doesn't make any sense to me, but that's what we're trying to do. All right, community.
One other quick
please.
question from me. It would be helpful, I assume we don't have it yet, but it would be helpful as soon as possible or as long in advance as possible to map out the meetings and future months too, so we can try to avoid conflicts on our calendar as much as possible.
That is a certainly reasonable request, and as soon as we get the homework back and find out who's willing to host, staff will start calling those folks and lock in dates. And so in other words, I'm making this up, but say it's the last Tuesday of every month. We call somebody who wants to do it. They say, I can't do Tuesday, I can do Wednesday. Then we'll take their Wednesday and then tell you long enough in advance. So we get it. We need to do it. Vic.
Yes, we had two people from the audience talking about alternatives to at least what I have been aware of things which could be done to the buildings, which are much less expensive and it appears to be as effective, if not more effective, and much cheaper. And I sure would like an expert, to talk about all the alternatives available and their cost, because I was not aware of that.
No, good. Well, we'll certainly do it, and that's part of your homework. Okay, I'm going to buzz through real quick here. So community involvement plan. So at each meeting, there will be a public involvement period, but we're going to create opportunities to meet with the public outside of these work group meetings, because obviously the members of the general public don't have the same access to raising their tent and getting a microphone. So right now we're going to be scheduling 4 quarterly listening sessions in different locations. We're looking for each of the 4 quadrants so that we can be geographically diverse in where we do it. And again, there's a preference to go out to the community, and there's a preference to do it in a URM building, but those are only 2 factors, not the only factors in deciding where to do it. It's likely that they're going to be scheduled for March, June, September, and December. We'll schedule them in this iterative process. So for instance, after the January and maybe February meeting, we'll have 2 work group meetings. We'll have made some progress. We'll have talked about the scope, the umbrella question, what have you. We bring that out to the community, say to the community, what do you think about the work group's work? Bring it back to you. We tell you public comments we received were A, B, C, D, E. And to what extent, group, do you want to add, multiply, edit your umbrella question or your work plan or whatever? So it's this iterative loop we're trying to create so that we always go out. Vic, did you have something else? Oh, no, me. I just checking. So we'll discuss work group activities and progress. We'll hear from subject matter experts. So we might try to do these things. So we have a meeting on X night, and an expert comes from more than 100 miles away. Well, then the next night we're out in the community, and that expert, stays at one of your homes, and then can speak at the community group thereafter. Moving forward, as I said, we'll send you homework, work plan, umbrella question, scope issues. Do you want to host a meeting or listening session? And all this stuff is due January 6th. However, if you have speaker suggestions with contact information, you cannot get them sooner to us, especially if we're trying to do a January 30 meeting and we need a speaker. We need to get that on their calendar, before December 25th in a perfect world, to make sure they are available. It's looking like the last Wednesdays of the month from 3 to 7 are working. Our next tentative agenda is address suggestions and concerns that you guys have raised, umbrella question and work plan, and start phase 1, setting the table. As far as the meeting evaluation, the last page in your binder is a meeting evaluation. We would love it if you took that out and filled that out, especially the comment sections, because again, this is a iterative process. You tell us what we did great, so we'll do it again. You tell us what needed improvement with suggestions, and we'll do it differently. If you don't fill them out, Devin fills them out for you, and they say excellent facilitation everywhere, and we can't let that happen. So going back, what are our goals for today? More information about each other, a bit more about how we got here, understanding the council's scope, exploring the proposed mechanics, had a training on collaboration and public official responsibilities. We've heard from the public, we determined next steps. There will be other homework you'll receive. I'll give a last call for questions, comments before we adjourn. Oh, Kathy had a comment or
I
question.
just wanted to clarify the next meeting, because you said the last Wednesday of every month, and that the 30th is a Thursday. Is that a firm date?
I'll look to BDS and PBEM to know. I don't know.
Those acronyms, Sam?
Those are acronyms. Again, you two, I do the jokes. You guys are just trying to steal my thunder. Yes, sir, Abe?
When does the council expect to receive a recommendation from us?
364 days from today, and I'm not being flippant. 1 year. We have 1 year from our first meeting.
Yeah,
Oh, and it's a leap year, so 365. Yeah, we get an extra day.
So just clarification, if there are many requests for outside experts, sometimes if they're living more than 100 miles away, and they're coming here on a horse and sleigh, it may take them a while to get here. Just all the additional work may end up going beyond that. I just wanted to get as much certainty as possible or flexibility.
Absolutely. I mean, we are trying to plan ahead as possible, but when you have this many people, it's kind of the motto is semper Gumby, always be flexible like Gumby, and try to move the. You're going to get a whole year of this. It's just you're going to be sick and tired of it. But yes, give us any information you can as soon as you can. Apparently, some people had difficulty finding their evaluations. Has everyone had a chance to find them now? Looks like you have. And please put your name tags and your name tents in your binder there. You can leave the cards and the little stand because those are a little harder to schlep around, and we'll just bring them back at every meeting for you. Last round, any questions, comments, concerns? Thank you. Go forth, do good, avoid evil, and see you next year. Take care.
Nice job.